Miss Elizabeth Bennet, Where the Heart Lives, written by P.O. Dixon, read by Christopher. Chapter 1. Gone Forever. Daunting shades of crimson, orange and yellow lit up the night sky, a horrendous telltale sign of fires raging fiercely out of control. Standing by the window of her Netherfield apartment, Elizabeth could almost feel the hot burning flames against her skin. It's Longbourn Village! Have the flames reached the manor house? Did my family escape? Are they safe? Elizabeth tore herself from the window and hurried across the room, throwing on her robe, but one thing ran through her mind. I must go to them. The household had settled some hours ago, but one would not know it were one to judge by its now excited state. Netherfield was full of unrest. Elizabeth threw a concerned glance at the door of her sister's apartment. There is comfort in knowing my dearest Jane is safe. Oh, but what of my other sisters, Mary, Kitty and Lydia? What of Papa and Mamma? Not wishing to disturb Jane, whom Elizabeth hoped was sleeping soundly despite the commotion, she hurried past the door. She was bounding down the stairs when she came face to face with Mrs. Louisa Hurst and Miss Caroline Bingley. "Where on earth do you suppose you're going at this hour, Miss Eliza?" the younger of the two ladies beseeched. Although Elizabeth was a guest in their brother's home, she cared little for the two of them. The feelings were mutual. With no time for feigned civility, Elizabeth said, "Fire is raging out of control in Longbourn Village. Move out of my way!" The other woman seized hold of Elizabeth's arm. "What are you planning to do? Surely you do not intend to walk all the way to Longbourn at this hour, and under cover of darkness, I might add. There is no one to accompany you and nothing to guide your way. Nearly all of the men have gone to assist in combating the fire. Besides, what are you going to do should you manage to make your way there in the dark?" Miss Bingley cried. "You had much better stay here where it is safe. If only I could have convinced my brother Charles and Mr. Darcy to do the same, I would not be half so worried as I am. Pray let us not forget that my dear husband, Mr. Hurst, also rode out to do what he might do as well." 1,000 thoughts leaped through Elizabeth's head. Who are these two to attempt to tell me what to do? Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy are at Longbourn fighting the fire. Is every able-bodied person from miles around there as well? Elizabeth jerked her arm from Mrs. Hurst's grip and resumed her trek down the stairs. "What are you thinking, Miss Eliza? Mr. Darcy gave us strict orders that you must not be allowed to leave here tonight. There is nothing you can do." "Oh, leave me alone." Having failed in their efforts to prevent the second eldest Bennet daughter from fleeing the safety of Netherfield in the middle of the night, the Bingley sisters did manage to deter Elizabeth long enough to call for a carriage, and the three of them set off for Longbourn. By the time they arrived, it was painfully apparent that considerable efforts to save the manor house had been abandoned in favour of sparing the nearby structures. Her heart breaking in two, Elizabeth's attention was immediately drawn to her wailing mother. She sprang from the carriage unassisted and raced to her side. "Oh, Lizzie!" the older woman cried. "My precious Lydia is trapped inside! Oh! I just know I shall never see my darling child again!" Elizabeth embraced her mother tightly, her heart pounding and her thoughts whispering 1,000 prayers that the unfolding nightmare was just that. A horrible nightmare. She espied her father and her two younger sisters, Mary and Kitty, huddling together. The comfort in seeing the three of them was nothing in comparison to the frightening prospect of her mother's lamentations. Surrendering to her fears, Elizabeth wept. No sooner than her prayers had been whispered, they were answered. Loud cries of jubilation amid the perilous destruction erupted. Elizabeth spun around in the direction of the raging fire, engulfing her beloved home, to see a tall, dark creature emerging from amid the roaring flames dancing all around him. She gasped. Mr. Darcy stumbled from the burning building, bearing her youngest sister's slumped body in his arms. "Is she alive?" Elizabeth wondered, still embracing her distraught mother. As soon as he was out of danger, Mr. Darcy lowered young Lydia Bennet to the ground, a safe distance away from the burning building. Dropping to his knees, he cradled Lydia's head while checking for signs of life. Mrs. Bennet had also seen the brave gentleman emerge from the daring devastation with her youngest daughter in his arms. Freeing herself from her second eldest daughter's embrace, she raced frantically to where Mr. Darcy and Lydia were and pushed her way through the concerned crowd just in time to see the gentleman comforting her daughter. Elizabeth arrived on her mother's heels. She wanted to fall to her knees in gratitude. Lydia is alive. What did it matter that the house was collapsing under the weight of the fire's wrath, and nearly all her family's worldly possessions were gone? Her father, her mother, and all her sisters were alive. Darcy surrendered Lydia to her mother's arms. Standing, he scanned the destruction all around. Elizabeth could only imagine the nature of the thoughts racing through his mind. Did he realise that he might very well have perished while attempting to save a young girl so wholly unconnected to him? Did he know how indebted her family would be to him for the rest of their lives? Seeing her elated mother cradling her daughter to her chest and sobbing tears of joy, Elizabeth wanted to go to Mr. Darcy and thank him for what he had done. Before she could, she espied Miss Caroline Bingley forcing her way to his side. "Mr. Darcy," Miss Bingley cried, "thank heavens you did not fall victim to the fire. What on earth were you thinking?" she gulped. "You've been injured." Indeed, the gentleman had a severe gash above his brow, and his clothes were tattered and torn, evidencing other possible injuries. "Come with me to the carriage," Miss Bingley urged, seizing hold of his arm and coaxing him a short distance away from the others. "We must get you back to Netherfield at once to attend your injuries." "No!" Darcy protested, freeing his arm from the young woman's grasp. Seconds later he tumbled to the ground. Elizabeth's prayers were soon to be answered again. Her whole heart swelled with relief upon witnessing Mr. Darcy struggle to his feet and walk away, largely of his own accord, save the assistance of his friend Mr. Charles Bingley, who had rushed to his side within moments of his collapse. His recovery prompted a wave of relief among all those who were not consumed by fighting the fire still steadily raging out of control. Elizabeth drifted from her mother's side to where her father sat on the ground, shrouded by a heavy woolen blanket, and surrounded by volumes of leather-bound books scattered there and about. She could only imagine the lengths to which he and others must have gone to salvage so many of his cherished possessions. Upon close inspection, she noticed his bandaged arm. He'd been injured. She flung herself to her knees and gingerly wrapped her arms around him in a comforting embrace. She could not say that he noticed her. In his weary, tear-filled eyes, she saw paralysed shock at the events unfolding before him. Their beloved Longbourn Manor would soon be gone forever. "We can rebuild," she whispered to her father. Silence was all she heard from the man she long considered the best man in the world. Stunned silence. Glancing back in the direction where her mother sat cradling young Lydia to her bosom, Elizabeth noticed Mary and Kitty gently swaying back and forth, comforting each other. Elizabeth's mind escaped the surrounding devastation to a pleasurable moment in her recent past, to the day before when Mary sat at the pianoforte practising as she was so wont to do, to Kitty sitting in the window absent-mindedly tugging her dark hair, and to Lydia sitting beside her mother, urging her to do her bidding in an effort to persuade her father to advance the funds for a new gown. All this as Elizabeth herself donned her bonnet and cloak in preparation to walk to the neighbouring estate of Netherfield to be by her eldest sister Jane's side. "Dear, dear Jane." At her mother's insistence, she had ridden on horseback to Netherfield Park and subsequently fallen ill, after being caught in a huge downpour while on the way there. Jane had insisted in a letter dispatched to Longbourn that there was nothing much the matter with her other than a cold, but she wanted her sister by her side, and Elizabeth could think of no place she would rather be. She whispered a silent prayer of gratitude that Jane was safe some 3 miles away. Indeed, that all her family was safe. The loss of their home was nothing by comparison. Resting her head on her father's shoulder, she released a thankful sigh in that regard. They could rebuild, and they would. Of that she was utterly convinced. She was unaware of how much time had passed when the earliest signs of a new day gave Elizabeth reason to question the staunch conviction that had managed, theretofore, to bolster her spirits. The surrounding structures were far enough away from the manor house that they had all been spared. Longbourn House, on the other hand, or rather what was left of it, stood in ruins. Chapter 2. Mean Understanding. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a wealthy gentleman who imperils his life to rescue a young gentlewoman from a burning building must secretly harbour the desire to make said young woman his wife. Surely such was the manner of Mrs. Fanny Bennet's reasoning. A woman of mean understanding who had known her fair share of beauty. She fancied herself of a nervous constitution, particularly when she was discontented, which unfortunately for her husband and daughters was much more often than not. Although surrounded by destruction and confusion, her heart had been swollen with gratitude when, against all probabilities, the high and mighty Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy of Pemberley in Derbyshire emerged from the scorching flames devouring her beloved home, carrying the limp body of her darling daughter in his arms. Watching him walk to the awaiting carriage with the aid of his close friend Charles Bingley, quickly allayed her worries that he had fallen victim to the fire, and encouraged her to express her profound gratitude the only way a mother of 5 girls in want of husbands could be expected. "Thank God Almighty we are saved," she cried to the heavens above. "Thank God we are saved." "Indeed, mamma, we surely must be thankful Mr. Darcy braved the fierce burning fires to save our dear Lydia," Elizabeth said, having left her father's side to once again be of comfort to her mother. "Mr. Darcy is the best man in the world, for surely no one else would even dream of embarking on such a precarious undertaking," the older woman exclaimed. "Indeed, only the bravest of men would risk their own lives to save someone so wholly unconnected to them." Speaking to no one in particular, Mrs. Bennet questioned how she had missed detecting that the proud man was secretly in love with her youngest offspring. How it must have pained him to think that he might not ever see the woman who had laid hold of his heart and soul again. "Is there any wonder?" she asked her second eldest daughter. "My Lydia is truly a fine catch, and Mr. Darcy knows it. Oh, if only he were an officer! Oh, but I shall not complain," she consoled herself. "One cannot have everything." Thus resolved, she commenced steadily rocking back and forth. "Lydia, my dear, dear child." Lydia's eyes remained closed, which struck a deeper chord of panic in Mrs. Bennet. "Please, you must open your eyes, for there is a wedding to plan. Oh, you will have many fine jewels and what pin money! Pray, child, you must open your eyes." Lydia started coughing violently. Her eyes opened wide. She cried, "Wedding, mamma? What are you saying?" Elizabeth pressed her mother to cease speaking. This was no time to talk about such matters. Attempting to pacify her sibling, she bent forward and kissed Lydia's temple, which was blanketed still by traces of ashes and soot, despite their mother's earnest efforts to wipe away evidence of Lydia's brush with death. "The only thing that is of consequence is that you are safe and sound," Elizabeth whispered. "We are all safe." A sudden awareness propelled Elizabeth to her feet. Her elder sister had been so ill the evening prior that Elizabeth was certain she had slept throughout the night, but she might awaken at any moment. The thought that Jane might find out the news of what had unfolded at Longbourn during the dead of night from either of the Bingley sisters was untenable. "I must go to Jane. I must be the one who tells her what has taken place." Thus determined, she set off in the direction of Netherfield Park, crossing field after field, leaping over stiles and springing over puddles. She thought of the abhorrence written all over the Bingley sisters' faces that first occasion she showed up at Netherfield to attend her ailing sister, her hem 6 inches deep in mud. She supposed arriving this morning with her clothing soiled with soot must absolutely give the pernicious sisters cause for contempt. Fortunately, she did not have occasion to see any of the members of the Netherfield party upon her arrival. Not bothering to go to her own apartment for a quick change of attire, Elizabeth went directly to Jane's. After slowly pushing the door open, she was relieved to discover that Jane was quietly asleep. "Thank heavens for that," Elizabeth whispered. She walked to the bed and sat down. "Jane," she spoke softly, causing her dearest sister to stir. Jane opened her eyes. "Lizzie." As if perceiving something was amiss, she made an effort to sit up. "Oh, Jane," Elizabeth began, her voice still hushed and pained as she sought to maintain a calmness she did not possess. "I am afraid I have devastating news which I dare not permit another moment to pass by without telling you." An expression of sober alarm overspread Jane's angelic face. Now seated upright, she pleaded, "You must tell me at once." "It has to do with Longbourn." Elizabeth felt her throat constrict a bit. She reached out for the glass of water on the bedside table, brought it to her lips and took a sip. Finding her voice, she cried, "Last night, while you were sleeping, there was a fire." "Longbourn?" Elizabeth nodded her head. Tears welled in her eyes. "The manor house, our home, is gone. Destroyed completely." "My father?" Jane cried, bursting into tears. "My mother?" Brushing the tears that were now falling from her own eyes, Elizabeth said, "They are safe. Mary, Kitty and Lydia, they are all safe. Oh, Jane, it was a miracle. but we are all safe and sound." A moment or two of recounting their blessings thus ensued. At length Elizabeth declared, "We may have lost practically every material possession in the world, but all those things can be replaced. Longbourn can be rebuilt. I have expressed as much to Papa." She picked up her sibling's hand in hers and squeezed it gently. "The most important thing is we are all alive. We have each other. Nothing is more precious than that." Chapter 3. Foolish Expectations. It did not take long for word of Darcy's heroic feat to spread throughout every corner of Netherfield. To the surprise of many and the disbelief of a few, the news that he was obliged to marry the youngest Bennet daughter spread just as rampantly. Hearing said report from his valet infuriated Darcy. Unable to maintain his otherwise staid composure, he went in search of his friend and confided in him Mrs. Bennet's outrageous expectations. His friend needed to be aware of just how atrocious his new neighbours were. "I am sorry to hear of that, Darcy," responded Charles Bingley after listening to what his friend had to say. "I know full well you endangered your life to rescue her daughter. Anyone who was there understood the perils. You refused to give up even when the girl's very own father had surrendered hope, and this is the gratitude you are to receive. It sickens me. I never once supposed the lady capable of such selfishness." A handsome, intelligent-looking gentleman who was several years Darcy's junior, Bingley rarely had an unpleasant word to say about anyone. It was thereby a testimony to his loyalty to his friend that he readily acceded to the injustice of Mrs. Bennet's wilfulness to misconstrue Darcy's heroism merely to advance her own self-interests. "I suppose it goes to prove that nothing is more important to that woman than getting her 5 daughters married. It was reprehensible enough the measures she employed to throw her eldest daughter in your path. No question she has had her sights on you since the night of the assembly in Meryton. How dare she attempt to capture me in her web as well?" "Well, Darcy, the circumstances are not exactly the same, for I do admire Miss Bennet a great deal. I can think of a lot worse fates for a man like me." "What could be worse than the possibility of having to care for 6 women in the event an ill fate befalls Mr. Bennet before any of his daughters is married?" The younger man shrugged. "I suppose I never thought about it that way before." "Well, do you not consider it is time that you begin thinking that way, particularly now that the Bennets' home is destroyed, and it will require considerable cost and effort to rebuild?" Darcy gave into a bout of coughing, likely the after-effect of having rushed into a burning house and searched room after room until he discovered the half-conscious, youngest Bennet daughter and brought her to safety. "Are you prepared to take on such a monumental task?" Darcy picked up his drink and took a long sip. After a moment he went on with his speech. "For unless you are, I recommend you tread extremely carefully in any future engagement with Miss Bennet. No engagement is certainly not the word I would use. Better association with the lady. Be exceedingly cautious, my friend. If Bingley were to offer for Miss Bennet now, Netherfield would be swarming with Bennet relations no sooner than the ink dried on the parchment," he silently reflected. Darcy felt he simply was being of service to his friend, in warning him to be careful about showing so much attention to Miss Jane Bennet. He was certainly not insensitive to the Bennet family's predicament, but he did take umbrage with the mother's foolish expectations. All the Bennets' neighbours were doing what they could to come to the Bennet family's aid during this time of need, just as neighbours were wont to do. He could not fault his friend Bingley for doing his part as well and making his home available to the 2 eldest Bennet daughters for a lengthier stay. He would have done the same. As it was, the family was scattered all over Meryton, with 2 of them, the mother and the youngest daughter, staying with the Phillips, Mrs. Bennet's sister and brother-in-law, and the remaining 2 staying with the Longs. Mr. Bennet planned to make do in the Dower House, a fairly modest dwelling in Longbourn village that had been built for and last been occupied by his widowed late grandmother several decades ago, until such time as it was made comfortable enough for his wife and daughters to join him. Darcy himself would do more were it not for Mrs. Bennet. The last thing he needed or wanted was to have her make something of his benevolence as well. Fortunately, the Dower House was beyond the reach of the fire and thus escaped any damage. I also understand that it is fairly habitable, and the family will soon be reunited under one roof, Darcy declared. That is a bit of a consolation, I suppose. I recall passing the Dower House when I called on Mr. Bennet soon after arriving in Hertfordshire. I must say it is rather modest, A family of 7 living in such confined quarters will not be an easy task, to say nothing of accommodations for the servants. That is an understatement indeed, but I have no doubt they will find a way to persevere. People of Mrs. Bennet's ilk always do. Chapter 4. Thorough Accounting. Remembering that Mr. Darcy had a practice of spending time alone in the library apart from his friends, Elizabeth purposely sought him out some time later that same day. "Miss Elizabeth," the gentleman said, standing when she walked into the room. "Mr. Darcy, may I speak with you?" "By all means." Elizabeth went to where he stood and accepted the proffered seat by the fireplace. He took a seat across from her, returning to his former attitude. "Sir," she began, "I do not know that I can thank you sufficiently for saving my sister's life." "I know. You and I have spoken of this," he bit his lower lip. "Earlier at breakfast. You do remember." Indeed, for it was the first time during her stay at Netherfield that she had occasion to dine alone with the gentleman. She attributed it to the early morning hour. The Bingleys and the Hursts were not known to be early risers. "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "Yes, we have, but I cannot say it enough. And now it has been brought to my attention, the talk in general circulation, that there are some in my family who would wilfully misinterpret what you did, and rather than express appreciation for your bravery, they've chosen instead to use your heroism to their greatest advantage, regardless of the impact it has on you and your good name." Having been given a thorough accounting earlier that day from her intimate friend and neighbour, Miss Charlotte Lucas, whom she had accidentally met on her return to Netherfield from Longbourn village, Elizabeth's embarrassment was beyond measure. "How can I make amends?" she pleaded, her expression laden with contrition. "Miss Elizabeth," he replied, leaning toward her and stretching out his hand to cover hers. He withdrew it just as suddenly. "I want you to know that as awkward and as unfortunate as this situation is, I do not blame you, and I certainly do not judge you as a consequence of someone else's motives. You might as well give that someone a name, for you and I both know who is the chief instigator: my mother." Darcy neither refuted nor affirmed Elizabeth's assertion, causing her to consider that such an acknowledgment would go against his gentlemanly principles. Elizabeth smiled a somewhat awkward smile. "It seems that she has placed you in an untenable position. Your reputation, and your character. Indeed, her mother attempting to turn his selfless deed against him, by insisting he marry young Lydia when she ought to be down on her hands and knees, thanking him for saving her favourite daughter's life, was unconscionable in Elizabeth's manner of thinking. "I am glad you understand," Mr. Darcy replied, an expression of graciousness mixed with reassurance on his face. "Sir, my wish is for you to understand that Jane is nothing at all like my mother in that respect. It is not in her nature to be mercenary. Jane is kind and generous, and she does not always show her true feelings to anyone save those who know her best." A puzzled look graced his countenance. "Why are you telling me all this?" "I want to rid you of any misconceptions where my sister's feelings for your friend are concerned. Let me assure you that she cares more for Mr. Bingley than you can possibly know. True, an alliance between my sister and your friend would redound entirely to her advantage, but if Mr. Bingley does not object, pray you will not object either." "You imagine I wield a great deal of influence over Bingley, do you not?" "Do you deny it, sir?" Darcy said nothing, which was ample inducement for Elizabeth to go on. "I am certain the gentleman knows what he is about where his feelings for my sister are concerned." At length he replied, "I know Bingley. You recall hearing him boast that whatever he does in a hurry, and should he resolve to leave Netherfield, he would do so without a moment's hesitation when we were all gathered in the drawing-room mere days before the fire at Longbourn." She flinched a little at his mention of the fire. She determined to press through. Indeed, Elizabeth recalled saying at the time that the sort of behaviour Mr. Bingley boasted of was exactly what she had supposed of him. It would not do to concede that particular point at the moment, and thus she said nothing. "Let me assure you that every word he spoke is true. He is not the most reliable man in England. Now tell me why on earth would you wish for such a man for your sister? Are you saying my sister is too good for the likes of your friend?" "What I'm saying is this is not the first time I have known my friend to fall in love with a fair angelic creature without a moment's delay, only to put her completely out of his mind within a week of their separation. I posit this instance is no different from the rest. You offer a rather uncharitable assessment of your friend's character, sir. I should hate to know what you think of your enemies. I suspect my mother might not fare well. It is true that my good opinion once lost is lost forever." He looked at her intently. "Pray do not concern yourself with such matters as that. You have far greater difficulties with which to concern yourself, I am certain." "Do you mean such matters as what is to become of my family in the wake of the fire that destroyed our home? I can easily imagine it is an inconvenience to everyone that Jane and I are forced to remain here longer than anyone ever had in mind. It is what Bingley wants, and what's more, it is for the best. Speaking on his behalf, I would ask you not to trouble yourself with thoughts of inconveniencing anyone." "I'm surprised to hear you speak this way, sir. Pleasantly surprised, I pray. It is not my intention to make you feel otherwise." She smiled a little. Oddly enough, she found conversing with the gentleman comforting, a fact which in and of itself was a bit disconcerting. This was the proud Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, after all, the man who at one time had proclaimed that she was not handsome enough to tempt him. Having said what she had come to say, and wanting very much to go away on a cordial note, Elizabeth stood up from her chair to take her leave. Mr. Darcy stood as well. "Sir, I thank you for your understanding. Pray will you excuse me? I should return to my sister." She curtsied, and thereupon proceeded on her way. She did not go to Jane's apartment directly. First, she needed to retrieve her book from the drawing-room. Chapter 5. Mercenary Purposes. "Louisa, my dear, have you heard the latest rumour?" "Caroline, how often do I need to remind you to pay no attention to idle gossip emanating from among the servants? You know very well they have nothing better to do with their time." "Perhaps, but my maid assures me that this one is true, for it is being talked about in Meryton. It concerns those Bennets." Her interest now piqued, Louisa leaned forward. "Pray, what is it?" "It has to do with the reason Darcy put himself in harm's way. Indeed, that foolish girl raced back inside the burning building after she and her sisters had managed to escape safely when no one was looking. Mr. Darcy braved the flames to recover her when all others had given up, including her own father, I'm told." The other woman gasped. Why on earth would the girl put herself in harm's way after escaping safely? "To save her new bonnet," Louisa rolled her eyes. "Those people," she complained. "Indeed." And rather than showing her appreciation that Darcy risked his own life to rescue her youngest daughter, Mrs. Bennet has concluded that he ought to marry the girl. That woman is determined that he compromised her silly daughter by carrying her in his arms away from a burning building. Can you imagine anything more ludicrous? "Well, it sounds as though some people will stop at nothing. I take it you're referring to his noble aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh." "Indeed. How many times have we heard it said that it is the favourite wish of hers that her nephew will marry her daughter? What a frightful creature she was when last I caught sight of her in town, so thin, so pale." Louisa remarked, "No doubt you do not believe a single word of it, sister." "Certainly, I do not, and I never shall, not until I see a ring on the young woman's finger. In the interim, I mean to do everything in my power to make sure such an occasion does not come about." The two ladies looked up from their respective occupations and espied Elizabeth standing at the doorway. Caroline coloured, as did her sister. The former cried, "Why, Miss Eliza, how long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," Elizabeth silently pondered. "I left my book on the table. I came to retrieve it, and then I shall return to Jane's bedside." "Pray, how is Miss Bennet getting along?" "I believe she's feeling much better." Elizabeth really could not wait to get away from the two ladies' company. There was so much to contemplate after what she had overheard. What a revelation this was to her to find out that Mr. Darcy was expected to marry his cousin. Not that it was of consequence to Elizabeth, but the possibility that Caroline Bingley's own hopes would be thwarted by such a union was the best thing she had heard all day. The matter of her mother wanting Mr. Darcy to marry Lydia, well, that was quite another thing. She could not wait to quit Netherfield and speak to her mother and put an end to such foolishness. How she wished for nothing more than to inform her mother that Mr. Darcy was already spoken for, but as she had no definite knowledge of the scheme beyond what she had just overheard, she decided it was best to remain silent on the subject. Some other stratagem is called for to persuade Mamma against her mercenary purposes. Suspecting Elizabeth was gone, Caroline spoke to her sister in a hushed voice. "How long do you suppose Miss Eliza Bennet was standing there? Do you think she overheard what we were saying just then about Mr. Darcy?" Even if she listened to everything you said, what difference does it make to her? Perhaps she'll take that little bit of intelligence and pass it on to her silly mother, at which point Mr. Darcy will undoubtedly be in your debt. You make an excellent point, sister. Nothing would satisfy me more than to have Mr. Darcy in my debt. How well Mrs. Hurst could attest to Caroline's assertion. What member of the female persuasion would not wish to have such a healthy young man obliged to her? So tall and so exceedingly handsome, Mr. Darcy no doubt was every woman's dream. But she dared not to utter a single word of such sentiments to her sister, for she was not certain Caroline's maidenly sensibilities could endure it. His power over women is undeniable, and yet there is one among our little party who appears entirely immune to it. She laughed a little to herself, in recollection of the manner in which Mr. Darcy stared at Elizabeth Bennet when he thought no one was looking and his body's telling response. My sister can barely tolerate that young woman as it is. I should hate to imagine what she would do if she knew just how violently affected the gentleman is by Eliza Bennet's mere presence. Chapter 6. Family Party. A week or so later, Mr. Bennet and his lady sat together in the parlour. "I have reason to expect an addition to our family party," the gentleman said. Not troubling herself to look up from her sewing, Mrs. Bennet responded, "Who would dare call on us so soon after the fire? We have hardly settled here into the dower house. While it is comfortable enough for our family, this house is hardly fit to entertain visitors. Best described as being an odd mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humour, reserve, and caprice," the gentleman said. "I would agree with you, but it is my cousin, Mr. William Collins, who will be doing us the honour. What is more, he intends to remain with us for the indeterminate future. There is scarcely sufficient room for the 7 of us. Can the gentleman be prevailed upon to secure lodging at the inn in Meryton? I fear not. I am afraid his intention in staying here is to assess what has become of his future inheritance. As it is the gentleman's birthright, we can hardly refuse such a petition." Her expression aggravated, her voice excited, she cried, "Nevertheless, it is much too soon for us to think of entertaining a house guest, even if he is the so-called heir of Longbourn. Now, my dear, I was just as concerned as you are when I received a letter from him stating that he still intended to call on us, especially in light of all that has taken place. What do you mean when you say he still intends to come? I first learned of his intentions days before the fire. Indeed, he wrote, informing me he meant to extend an olive branch of sorts as a means of healing the breach between the 2 of us, as a consequence of the entail. Perchance the gentleman is not fully aware of all that has happened, the absolute ruin of the manor house. No, he is very much aware, for I wrote to him myself to explain the situation. I suggested he might wish to defer our pleasure in receiving him until we are better prepared to accommodate him. He then wrote to me to say that he will not hear of it. However, you will not be disappointed when I tell you exactly what he is about." Mrs. Bennet nodded, which was sufficient encouragement for her husband to go on. He retrieved his cousin's most recent missive from his pocket, and commenced perusing its contents in silence. At length he said, "Ah, here it is, my dear. Here is the evidence that my cousin Mr. Collins was then and still is very much in want of a wife." The gentleman began reading aloud. "I cannot be otherwise than concerned at being the means of injuring your amiable daughters, and beg leave to apologise for it, as well as to assure you of my readiness to make them every possible amends, but of this hereafter." Hearing this, Mrs. Bennet poised herself on the edge of her seat. She encouraged her husband to continue with a wave of hand when he paused a moment and read in silence. Seconds later, Mr. Bennet commenced reading audibly once again. "I am very sensible of the hardship to my fair cousins, and could say much on the subject, but that I am cautious of appearing forward and precipitate. But be assured I shall come prepared to admire each of them collectively and at least one of them specifically." His lady clutched her hands to her chest. "Oh, Mr. Bennet, you do delight in vexing me. You have known all this time that we were in a good way of getting rid of one of our daughters, and you did not say a single word to me." Willing to put up with any measure of inconvenience for the sake of seeing her daughters well settled, she sprang from her seat. "Oh, there is so much to do to ready ourselves for Mr. Collins' arrival. I shall have Hill move the 3 youngest girls into one room, and Jane and Elizabeth shall share another." Her mind humming with anticipation, while she proceeded to quit the room, she said, We shall have 3 daughters, married off in no time at all. Heavens, I shall go completely distracted. Stopping short of the half-open door, she spun around on her heels. When exactly did you say our guest will arrive? He is expected to be here this afternoon. Mr. Bennet. That does not leave me with very much time at all before the gentleman comes. I must summon cook to prepare a proper table, which shall require a trip to Meryton, and Hill is already carrying out the work of 3 servants. Well, I must take some comfort in knowing that my Jane and Lizzie are expected from Netherfield at any moment, even though I do wish Jane had kept herself ill longer, for she has yet to secure a proposal of marriage from Mr. Bingley. I would then send my Lydia to stay with Jane in Lizzie's stead, for Lizzie's presence will be far more useful here than far away at Netherfield, and Lydia's presence at Netherfield would be just the thing to arouse Mr. Darcy into offering his hand to her in marriage, as he ought to have done long before now, in view of what took place the night of the fire. Her husband peered over his spectacles. You suppose the young man's valiant endeavour to save our youngest daughter's life ought to be rewarded with her hand in marriage, my dear? Indeed, I most certainly do. What else but love of the deepest kind would induce such a man to risk his own life for another? I suppose that is one way to look at it, but my Lizzie is clever. I posit she's more likely to garner the attention of such a man than Lydia, whom I believe is the silliest girl in all of England, seconded only by Kitty. What's more, Lizzie has been in the gentleman's company for weeks. Would that not satisfy you just as well, were she to secure the young man's hand? Mrs. Bennet eyed her husband intently. Did you forget what that young man said about your precious Lizzie, Mr. Bennet? Need I remind you that he himself proclaimed she was not handsome enough to tempt him? My Lizzie is every bit as handsome as Lydia. More than that, she has a quickness about her that all her sisters combined lack. That may very well be, but you did not see Mr. Darcy racing into a burning building to save Lizzie. No, it was my Lydia that he placed his own life in jeopardy to save, and that is all I will say on this subject. My plans for Lydia and Mr. Darcy are quite fixed, and as for my plans for Lizzie, it is absolutely essential that she is here when Mr. Collins arrives. How so, my dear? Why, I mean for Lizzie to be the one who secures Mr. Collins's hand in marriage. Here again she turned to escape the room, and once again she spun around to face her husband. Mind you, Mr. Bennet, you're not to utter a word of my plans to anyone, especially Lizzie. You and I both know how stubborn she is. She likely will balk at the idea of such an arrangement, regardless of how agreeable the young man may be. However, such an alliance is what will be most advantageous for everyone concerned. I shall rely on you to stand by me in this. Chapter 7. Blessing in Disguise. The picturesque midday sun and blue sky, crowded with white fluffy clouds, seemed to fade away the instant the fire-ruined manor house came into view. Elizabeth had tried as best she could to prepare her sister Jane for what to expect, but even she was not prepared for the dismal picture that their former home presented as a result of the previous day's downpour. The 2 sisters embraced each other tightly as their carriage continued on past the destruction on the way to the dower house. No one was at the door to greet their arrival, which was just as well, for it gave the sisters a bit of time to recover themselves and go into the house with a modicum of composure that both were sure would be expected as well as required of the eldest Bennet daughters. Neither could imagine that accustoming themselves to such reduced circumstances was an easy task for their 2 youngest sisters, their mother, or even their father for that matter. Upon entering the house, both were taken aback by the flurry of activity they observed. Hill frantically directed the comings and goings of 3 servants, whom Elizabeth believed had been relieved of their duties after the fire. Neither Jane nor Elizabeth knew how to think or how to feel, and simply stood frozen in place in stunned silence. Moments later, Mrs. Bennet rounded a corner, donning an apron and clutching a cloth in her hands. "Jane, Lizzie, you are here, and not a moment too soon, I assure you, for there is much to be done." "Mamma!" Elizabeth cried with energy, "why are all these servants here?" "There is no time to explain all that now. Indeed, I require the 2 of you to follow me. I will show you where the 2 of you will be sleeping for the indeterminate future. You will recall that decision was made when I was last here, Mamma." Indeed, Elizabeth had made a concerted effort to spend whatever time she could away from Jane's side at Netherfield during the days after the fire at Longbourn village, being of assistance to her mother in preparing the dower house for their family to be reunited under the same roof, In her mind, the decision of who would be staying in which rooms was firmly established. The smallest of the bedrooms was meant for Jane. Elizabeth and Mary were meant to share a slightly larger room, and likewise Kitty and Lydia were meant to share another. The remaining upstairs bedroom was meant for the master and the mistress, the irony being that all the rooms combined encompassed the space of no more than 2.5 of the bedrooms at the manor house. In fact, the room assigned to Jane was not a proper bedroom at all, but rather a tiny room that had been used for storage. Elizabeth had overseen its alteration into suitable quarters for her dearest sister. "Oh, so much has changed since you were last here, Lizzie. Now come along with me, you two." "What has changed?" Elizabeth and Jane asked in unison. Not troubling herself to answer, Mrs. Bennet bounded up the stairs. "What has changed, Mamma?" Elizabeth asked once more, impatiently trailing along behind her. "If you must know, it seems we are to receive a house guest." "A house guest?" Elizabeth exclaimed with energy. "Who is visiting so soon after the fire?" "Mr. Bennet's cousin, the heir of Longbourn, is coming, and it is our duty to receive him in a manner befitting a gentleman of his consequence. Jane," she said, spinning around to look at her eldest, "I had no choice but to prepare the chamber that was meant to be yours for the gentleman's visit. You and Lizzie are to share the room previously meant for Lizzie and Mary. Mary must now share the room with Kitty and Lydia. And do not worry. Surely Mr. Collins' visit, however ill-timed, shall turn out to be a great blessing in disguise for our family." Elizabeth's inquiring mind was aroused. She had heard her mother and father speak of the heir apparent of Longbourn on numerous occasions, but never in such generous terms. Indeed, she was certain her mother resented this man, whose acquaintance she had never made, owing to the fact that he was the heir of their family's estate because of a bizarre entail away from the female line. He might very well throw the entire family out into the hedgerows as soon as Mr. Bennet dies, Elizabeth often heard her mother lament. Now she was effectively welcoming this usurper with open arms. "Again, Mamma, I beg you." "What has changed?" Elizabeth pleaded. "Why, just look around you," Mrs. Bennet said while doing likewise. "Just look around you." Ever punctual with his time, Mr. Collins arrived at Longbourn precisely at the appointed hour. The entire family proceeded to greet him with great politeness, especially the lady of the house. A tall, heavy-looking young man of 25. Collins' air was grave and stately, and his manner was very formal. Truth be told, the gentleman was not merely in want of a wife. He had his entire legacy to think about. He rightly supposed that Mr. Bennet would have no incentive to rebuild Longbourn if he did not take one of his 5 daughters off his hands. Given that it was in his own best interest to see Longbourn restored to its former glory, marrying one of his fair cousins was a small price to pay. Mrs. Bennet was beside herself with joy over the prospect of soon referring to the visitor as her son-in-law. Not one to leave anything at all to chance where the matter of securing a respectable husband for one of her daughters was at stake, she carried out a concerted effort to speak with the gentleman in private, while the rest of her family members were otherwise occupied. "Oh, Mr. Collins, I cannot tell you what it means to my husband and me to know that you wish to marry one of my daughters, despite what has happened to the estate. Mrs. Bennet," he began, "I ought to tell you that of all your lovely daughters, it is the eldest Miss Bennet, to whom I find myself much more attracted. She perfectly suits my idea of what a wife ought to be, beautiful and soft-spoken with an easy temperament." "Mr. Collins, you indeed have excellent taste to prefer my Jane, but I feel I ought to tell you that she is soon to be engaged. We look forward to her gentleman acquaintance extending her an offer of marriage any day." "Oh, what a shame, for I had already started imagining what our future life would be." "Sir, if it is beauty in a woman that you seek, then you need to look no further than my next eldest daughter, Lizzie. She would make any man an exceptional wife, I assure you. Indeed, she is generally spoken of as being the brightest jewel of the country." He peered at Elizabeth for the first time in the wake of her mother's commendation. His arched brow served as sufficient confirmation that he indeed deemed her a handsome woman. "The brightest jewel of the country," he repeated, leaning back on his heels. "What a conquest to claim such a woman as my wife," he calmly considered. "Indeed," he began, as a slow smile commenced creeping across his face. "Mind you, Mr. Collins, my Lizzie can be quite stubborn at times." He reared back his head. "Oh, do not misunderstand me. She's a sensible young woman. She will be most honoured to accept your proposal. She simply may require a bit of wooing." "Here," Mrs. Bennet winked, "if you take my meaning. To his manner of thinking, Mr. Collins was nothing if not perceptive, especially where such matters of the female heart were concerned. "Say no more," he replied. "I am quite aware that such sentimentalities are common among the fairer sex." Nodding knowingly, he concluded, "I shall know exactly how to carry my point when the time is right." Chapter 8. A Happy Occasion. Strongly encouraged not to leave the house for fear of missing a certain tall, handsome gentleman should he call on her at the Dower House that day, the youngest Bennet daughter sat near the window with expectant eyes trained on the path leading to the front entrance. Her mother and sisters were situated about the room as well. "Oh, I am in love!" cried young Lydia. A stout, well-grown girl of 15, she had a fine complexion and good-humoured countenance. Being the tallest of all her sisters gave her something to boast about, and being the wild, noisy and fearless creature that she was, she did so with alacrity. I should not have believed myself capable of falling in love with any man who does not don regimentals, but that is indeed what I have done, for I am so very deeply in love with Mr. Darcy. He is my hero, she waxed poetic, placing her clasped hands to her bosom. La! I can hardly wait for the two of us to be married. Indeed, your Mr. Darcy is a true knight in shining armour, who braved a raging fire to rescue his lady love from peril. You are undeniably a lucky young woman, Lydia. I know full well that I am, and do not think I do not tell myself that every single day. Although I cannot figure out why he is not called to declare his true love for me and offer his hand in marriage. I should very much like to be the first of my sisters to be married. Even though I am the youngest, I am the tallest, which must surely count for something. Mrs. Bennet frowned. I do not understand what is keeping him either, my darling. Perhaps I ought to speak with your father. He will be sensible of what is to be done. Everyone knows that Mr. Darcy has no other choice but to marry you. Why, I am certain everyone saw him holding you in his arms. Oh, do speak to Papa and tell him to make Mr. Darcy come and see me, else I shall have to go to Netherfield, and I would much rather not go there because it is so very far. Oh, but we shall all be going to Netherfield soon enough. Do you not remember you secured Mr. Bingley's promise to give a ball once your sister Jane had fully recovered from her ailment? He cannot have failed to remember. Elizabeth winced at the recollection of the brazen manner in which her youngest sister had prevailed upon the gentleman's good-natured generosity when her mother and sisters called on Netherfield during Jane's convalescence. That was before the fire at Longbourn. She had been silent and calm throughout most of her mother and sister's ridiculous speech, but this latest sentiment was completely beyond the pale. "Mamma!" Elizabeth exclaimed with heightened emotion. "Surely you do not expect Mr. Bingley to honour that commitment now in light of all that has taken place?" "Why, I most certainly do." "Why should the gentleman not give a ball when such a gathering affords precisely the diversion that we all need, in light of the tragic events of late?" "That is my point. This is no time for a celebration. No, I must beg to take exception. Who doesn't like a ball? But, mamma, what of the expense? If I know anything at all, you will want all your daughters as well as yourself to dress in pretty gowns, and none of us is in possession of such finery. Then I shall have to go and speak to the dressmaker in Meryton at once. I shall prevail upon Mr. Bennet to arrange for additional credit if need be. What is the expense of 6 new gowns for such a happy occasion as this?" Elizabeth was aghast. Her mother seemed completely oblivious to matters of economy, a fault that might easily have been discounted prior to the fire, but not any more. "Mind you, Lizzie, if you're so much opposed to the idea of a ball, you're welcome to stay here and console yourself all alone. I shall not give up this opportunity, and neither shall any of your sisters. Mr. Bingley will undoubtedly wish to see Jane, and Mr. Darcy shall be head over heels in love with Lydia by the time the night is over." Elizabeth tried in vain to persuade her mother against her foolishness. After almost a quarter of an hour, she eventually persuaded herself of the pointlessness of her undertaking. Poor Mr. Darcy was nothing more than a means to an end so far as her mother was concerned. Her ensuing entreaty to her mother conveying this sentiment fell on deaf ears. "It is a mother's duty to find respectable husbands for all of her daughters, and I will attend my business in any manner I deem necessary." She narrowed her eyes. "Unless you have come up with a means of ensnaring the gentleman for yourself, Miss Lizzie, I advise you to keep your opinions on the matter to yourself. I, for one, would not be the least bit displeased so long as he marries one of you, for it will be one less match for me to bring about." Such an avowal was instantly met with Lydia's outcries of how she would never forgive her sister should she try to steal her future husband. Ignoring Lydia's ranting completely, Elizabeth could not help but sigh in the wake of such a confession. Indeed, the business of her mother's life was finding husbands for her 5 daughters. I might very well beseech birds to cease flying, fish to cease swimming. Not too long thereafter, Elizabeth thought she might appeal to her father to make him see reason, and rein in her mother as regarded the Netherfield ball. "Papa, can you not see how inappropriate it will be for my mother and sisters to be making merriment at a ball and parading around in fine gowns and the like, when our neighbours and friends have been so generous in their outpouring of support in the fire's wake, providing subsistence and furnishings and doing everything in their power to help further ensure our creature comforts are met during our time of need? Lizzie, surely you can see that we shall have no peace if your mother and your sisters do not go to the ball." "Peace? Is that all you think about? Would you have your own family make a mockery of our neighbours' benevolence? Surely you know full well that my younger sisters will display an appalling lack of decorum. What can any of that mean to you, my child? No doubt you are used to such behaviour. It has never bothered you before. In fact, have you and I not made sport of your sisters' want of propriety? What has gotten into you that you now find them all somehow objectionable?" "Our family's diminished circumstances, for one, Papa." "So is that what this is about? You're now ashamed to be associated with your mother and sisters because of our loss of standing in the community owing to our reduced circumstances. I assure you, my dear, this is merely a temporary impediment. Papa, you know that is not the reason for my objection. Then perhaps you will be more forthcoming. You did allude to there being more than one reason. There is the matter of Mamma's preposterous expectations for Lydia's marital prospects with Netherfield's house guest." "Ah, Mr. Darcy, I would not be so quick to dismiss your mother's favourite wish in that regard if I were you. If that fellow happened to marry your younger sister, even against his will, think of what it would mean for the salvation of our family." Her mouth fell open. "Why should Mr. Darcy be obliged to be the means to our family's future security?" Elizabeth cried with energy. "You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns. I was given to believe you hated the man ever since he first came to Hertfordshire, and proclaimed you were not handsome enough to tempt him. Has anything happened to change your mind about him?" "Do you mean other than the gentleman saving my sister from dying in the fire? Do not think that I am not grateful to the gentleman. Are you indeed grateful, Papa? Have you given yourself the trouble of thanking him?" He shrugged nonchalantly. "I have not seen him since the fire. I fear an impersonal letter would serve as a paltry substitute for a face-to-face meeting. What with all that I have had to occupy my time, making social calls has not been a priority. Again, I say you seem to take an eager interest in concerns that ought to be Mr. Darcy's alone. Other than saving your sister's life, I can hardly account for your change in sentiments. I insist that you tell me what has brought it about." "Honour and decency," she wanted to say. She did not wish to disrespect her father, and thus she remained silent. "It is exactly as I supposed. Nothing else has changed, which is the way it ought to be. That said, you are free to remain here at Longbourn Village the night of the ball. I shall do nothing to deny any of your sisters their share of fun. I posit it is just what is called for to restore some much-needed semblance of normalcy in our home." Here he glanced around the room, which was not anywhere nearly so comfortable as his former study in the now-destroyed manor house had been. Such that it is. By the time Elizabeth returned to her room a while later, her mind was in utter turmoil. She scarcely recognised the man her father was becoming in the fire's aftermath. A part of her whispered that he, in fact, had always been somewhat cynical. She shook her head in an effort to perish such thoughts. Thomas Bennet was the best man she knew. Soon he will return to the man he was. Her spirits lightened immensely when she espied her sister Jane sitting by the window. Even as sensible as Jane was, Elizabeth doubted her ability to exert influence on either of their parents to be reasonable, but surely Jane would listen to her side of the story. There was comfort enough in that prospect. At length, Elizabeth poured her heart out to her sister, fully recounting her earlier encounters with both parents. Jane placed her hand on her sister's and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Lizzie, I do understand your sentiments. However, if Mr. Bingley were to give a ball specifically at Lydia's request, do you not suppose it would be an affront to him were all our family to stay away? Jane, you and I both know full well that Lydia's request carries little sway with the gentleman. I have no doubt that were he to give a ball, he would be doing so for you, which would only make my determination to stay away even more difficult. If what you suggest is true, that Mr. Bingley's affection for me might serve as his motivation for giving a ball, it is even better reason that I would want, nay, need you by my side. Should events unfold accordingly, please say you will reconsider your stance. I would be forever in your debt. Chapter 9. Perfect Tranquillity. Upon learning of the general expectation among his neighbours that he would indeed be giving a ball, Charles Bingley, who had at times wavered back and forth on the impropriety of such an event on the heels of the Bennets' misfortune, was released from all his doubts. The question then became not if there would be a ball at Netherfield, but rather when. Hence, as soon as his cook made white soup enough, Bingley sent round his cards. Mrs. Bennet, having chosen to consider the ball as given in compliment to her eldest daughter, was particularly flattered upon receiving the invitation from Mr. Bingley himself, instead of a ceremonious card. Receiving the gentleman caller at the Dower House was a pleasure indeed. Mr. Darcy's rather conspicuous absence, although particularly disconcerting to the lady, was something she decided not to dwell upon. There would be time enough for her to work on the gentleman when they were once again in company at Netherfield. In deference to her dearest sister Jane, Elizabeth went to the Netherfield ball. She did not, however, go along with the idea of wearing a new gown. Instead, she made do with a dress she assembled from among a few of the garments donated by her neighbours during the days after the fire. Jane and Mary did likewise. A few alterations here and a particular adornment there, and all the gowns looked as though they were new. Only Kitty and Lydia could not be bothered by such menial tasks. To Lydia's way of thinking, the future wife of Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, who purportedly had £10,000 a year, surely could not be expected to wear second-hand clothes. She went so far as to promise all her sisters that once the blessed occasion occurred, she would be certain to buy all of them a dozen new gowns each. Fortunately, there was one aspect of the evening that Elizabeth found rather comforting. She had opportunity to spend time with her friend Charlotte, whom she had not seen in a week, owing to a succession of rain prohibiting their roving about the countryside. While standing together away from the room's merrymakers, Charlotte and Elizabeth espied Mr. Darcy walking in their direction. "It appears Mr. Darcy is headed this way, dear Eliza." The fact that Charlotte and Elizabeth were the only two people standing in that part of the room prompted the latter to reply, "I suppose he intends to gain a better vantage point from which to listen to what you and I are saying. Or perhaps he intends to apply to you to dance the next set. I somewhat doubt it. You will recall that the gentleman does not enjoy dancing with those with whom he is not particularly acquainted. However, you will recall he was perfectly willing to dance with you during our last gathering at Lucas Lodge." The remembrance of happier times before the fire at Longbourn warmed Elizabeth's spirits a little. "I remember your father, Sir William, strongly recommending that the gentleman dance with me. Otherwise he would never have asked, I'm certain. Besides, it is just as likely he will ask you to dance as he will ask me." "Shall we put your assertion to the test?" Charlotte inquired, even as she proceeded to walk away. Turning a second too late and observing her friend escape her side, she beseeched, "Charlotte, where are you going?" Before Elizabeth knew what she was about, she and Mr. Darcy stood directly before each other. Against her will, her heartbeat quickened. It had been so long since they were last together. It was as though a part of her almost had forgotten his wonderfully divine air, and how soothing at times she had found being in his company. Almost. She curtsied. He bowed. He said, "You are not dancing this evening, Miss Elizabeth?" "No, sir. I really do not feel very much like dancing, what with my family's situation." He threw a quick glance about the room. Returning his attention to her, he said, "Your sisters do not seem to harbour such reservations. I imagine that is but one of many things I do not have in common with my sisters." Undoubtedly, Darcy considered. Almost from the moment he first conversed with her, he imagined she could not always have been of Longbourn. She was nothing at all like her sisters, not even the eldest, who struck him as someone whose principal goal in life was to please others. Not Miss Elizabeth Bennet. He suspected that in addition to her abundance of wit and charm, she was a young woman who knew her own mind. He said, "I would not wish to impose, but should you be amenable to dance this evening, I should like it to be with me. Mr. Darcy, can this be you going out of your way to dance with me?" I was of the opinion that you eschewed the activity whenever you could help it. I am not opposed to making an exception for you. You are very kind, sir. And I speak not only of your willingness to dance," she half smiled. "Let me apologise again and again for my mamma's lack of gratitude toward you for saving my sister's life." "You do not have to go on thanking me. I understand your sentiments perfectly well. Likewise, I understand your mother's point of view to an extent. No doubt you are accustomed to eager mammas doing everything in their power to land rich husbands for their unwed daughters. I am afraid that what mamma has done is beyond the pale. Who would condemn you or question your sense of honour were you to take your leave of Hertfordshire and never again look back?" A half-hour or so after conversing with Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth was standing alone on the balcony and looking up at the night sky in awe. The brisk air was such a balm to her warring sensibilities. What a spectacle her family was making of themselves that evening, everyone save Jane and Elizabeth's excellent father. Elizabeth, upon tearing her eyes from the amazing bright full moon, espied Mr. Bennet approaching her. No doubt his desire for a bit of solitude was equally as strong as hers. Another confirmation in her mind of just how much the two of them were alike. Whatever awkwardness that existed between them, as a consequence of his not seeing her side of things, would soon fade, she was certain. "Lizzie," he said once they were standing face to face, "Mr. Collins informed me that you turned down his request for a set earlier this evening." "Indeed I did. My sole purpose in being here is to support my sister Jane. Be that as it may, I do wish you would show a bit more consideration where our cousin is concerned. I know, he is not the most charming gentleman in attendance this evening, but I believe he admires you very much. You ought to do everything in your power to encourage his esteem. The same applies for all your sisters. Lest you fail to remember, your cousin's good opinion is vitally important to our family. The possibility that her father was suggesting what she thought he was suggesting surely called for a modicum of protest on Elizabeth's part, but not wishing to be discourteous toward him, she wisely remained quiet on the matter. "Papa," she responded at length, "I promised Jane I would remain by her side, and I fear I have been terribly remiss. Pray pardon me, I must return to the ballroom." "That is a splendid idea, my child. I have it on good authority that Mr. Collins is amenable to applying to you for another set. Pray you will accept his request. All your sisters have granted your cousin this honour, I shall expect no less from you." Once again mindful of her desire to respect her father's counsel, Elizabeth remained silent. Instead, she curtsied and then hurried away. Only she did not go to the ballroom as she had originally intended. Instead, she headed in the direction of the library. Glad to find the room unoccupied, Elizabeth walked to a window overlooking one of Netherfield's magnificent gardens. Wrapping her arms around her shoulders, she relished her newly established solitude. If only I might make this moment of perfect tranquillity last for the duration of the evening, she silently considered. Such was not to be, she soon came to suspect. Realizing she was no longer alone, Elizabeth spun around. Her heart thumped. "Mr. Darcy, I thought I might find you here. Do you mean to suggest that you were actually looking for me, sir?" "Indeed I was." "Why?" "You walked by me, earlier, Bingley and me." He tried unsuccessfully to garner your attention. "I could not help noticing that you seemed troubled." Elizabeth, not knowing what to think of Mr. Darcy's swell of compassion, chose to say nothing. "It might help to talk about whatever is bothering you." "I hardly think you would be interested in anything I have to say, sir. I would like to think you know me better than that, Miss Elizabeth." Now she really didn't know what to make of this change in Mr. Darcy. True, the two of them had enjoyed moments of mutual civility when she and her sister were guests at Netherfield. However, the same could be said of a portion of her time in company with those awful Bingley sisters. She suspected that deep down inside Mr. Darcy was more similar to those two than not. She stared at him most intently, searching his eyes. "Do you honestly care, sir? Or is this merely your way of exposing a perceived weakness in my character, one that you might later use as fodder for dinner-time discourse with the likes of Miss Bingley and her sister Mrs. Hurst? On the contrary, whatever you may think of me, I am not wholly insensitive to the feelings of others. Of course you are not. Pray forgive me." Lowering her arms and likewise her guard, she said, "In truth, that my father suggested to me earlier, when the two of us stood alone on the balcony. It has to do with our cousin, a Mr. William Collins." "Pardon, I understand that his patroness and your aunt are one and the same, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Would you happen to be acquainted with the gentleman?" "No. I've yet to meet him formally, although I understand he's a fellow guest this evening. My aunt, however, spoke highly of him when he first took over his position. At the time, she proclaimed him to be a most devoted recipient of her benevolence. No doubt her power over him is what has set him upon his present course. You see, sir," he wrote to my father before arriving in Hertfordshire, strongly hinting of his intention to choose a bride from among his fair cousins. I believe his words were that he comes prepared to admire us, or something to that effect. I can imagine that this news meets with your mother's ardent approval. To know that one of her daughters might secure the hand of the heir apparent of Longbourn has surely become her favourite wish," she said. "And now I suspect it may very well be my father's favourite wish as well," Elizabeth added, but in a fainter voice. "I believe that reflects a certain degree of prudence on both of their parts that ought to be admired. Mr. Collins is, after all, a decent, respectable man, and yet I sense you disagree. As you stated, you have yet to be introduced to the gentleman, and thus you are relying solely upon his perceived circumstances. To really know my cousin is to know better than to judge a book by its cover. Then perhaps you ought to enlighten me. What is it about your cousin that you find so objectionable?" "Suffice it to say that I have my reasons I feel are best kept to myself. No doubt you place a great deal of stock in your own relation's good opinion of that gentleman. I shall not be the one to poison you against him." She laughed a little inside, remembering her cousin's sycophantic propensities. "Without a doubt, he will seek you out at some point during the course of the evening. At such time as that, you must decide for yourself. Saying that, I must now beg your pardon, for I must return to my sister Jane." Elizabeth meant to walk away, but the touch of his hand upon her own took her quite by surprise. Feelings she'd never known coursed through every fibre of her being, and just as swiftly as they began, they ceased with his release. "I am still very much in want of a set with you," he uttered, "Miss Elizabeth. I am unable to oblige your request. My cousin—" "Your cousin? You see, he asked me first." "Needless to say, I refused his request," she replied, almost apologetically. He nodded perceptively. "And hence you are obliged to sit out the rest of the evening. You cannot fathom how disappointed I am, knowing that I am to be denied the pleasure of standing opposite from you on the dance floor. A disappointment I suspect will be short-lived, especially given the number of ladies in want of partners this evening. I dare not argue your point regarding the number of eligible dance partners, but as for the duration of my disappointment, I am afraid you are mistaken. Promise me, the next time you and I attend a ball, you will reserve a spot on your dance card especially for me." Her spirits rising to playfulness, Elizabeth said, "Even if it means I must suffer a dance with my cousin, sir? Even if it means suffering a set with your cousin?" His eyes held fixed with hers. "Promise me." "I know I'm forever in your debt, but in such a case as this I fear you ask too much." Once again Darcy took Elizabeth's hand in his as though he was powerless to do otherwise. This time he raised her hand to his lips. He brushed a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "Do I?" Elizabeth's heart banged against her chest. "Promise me," he whispered. Sensing she might soon grow afraid of the gentleman now gently caressing her hand and gazing into her eyes, she said the only thing she could think of. "I promise." Chapter 10. Contentious Debate. Darcy kissed Elizabeth's lips. How divine. "It's you that I love. It's you that I need. Not that silly sister of yours, whom, under ordinary circumstances, I would avoid in the same manner one might avoid the plague." He drew her body closer to his. "My dreams of you are what accompany me throughout the night, and it has been a long time since I can remember awakening in the morning and not wishing that yours would be the first face I see." Darcy bolted up in bed. "Not that dream again," he silently complained. This was really getting to be too much. Even were he to bring himself to the point of openly confessing his increasing desire for Miss Elizabeth Bennet, what did it matter? It was not as though anything would ever become of it. The vast differences in their stations in life simply would not allow it. Thoughts of the supper-time chatter he was forced to endure the evening of the ball flooded his mind. Even the recollection of Mrs. Bennet's voice annoyed him. There will be a wedding here at Netherfield in under 3 months. A double wedding. You may mark my words. Making matters worse was the fact that the lady purposely spoke in a manner that he could not avoid hearing. despite the pleas from her friend Lady Lucas and even her second eldest daughter, to show a modicum of decorum the occasion warranted. Perhaps it truly is time for me to return to town and put all this madness behind me. Thus he determined to return to London that very day. Hours later Darcy carried out his resolve. As the carriage drew farther away, he could not help but be glad to take his leave of Hertfordshire, and so far as he could help it, he would never venture that way again. A sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach would not be repressed. If he had one regret other than that, it might very well mean he would never call on his friend again. It was that he would never see her again, Miss Elizabeth Bennet. How is it possible that she was reared by such a mother? Said sentiment had become Darcy's near constant companion. Away from that family of hers, she would be just the manner of woman with whom he could imagine himself spending the rest of his life. He threw a cursory look back over the entirety of their budding, however brief, acquaintance. It was just as well that he was leaving all that behind. The memories of her. It will not do, he considered at length. Our stations in life are far too dissimilar for me to form any serious designs on the young lady. Willing himself to think of anything or anyone other than the beguiling young woman who invaded his dreams each night, he turned his attention to complications within his power to effect. His friend Bingley had returned to town the day after the ball on matters of business. This suited Darcy's purposes perfectly well. With luck, he intended to convince his friend to remain in London, at least until the start of the new year. I might even persuade Bingley to give up the lease on Netherfield completely. Darcy shifted in his seat a bit as his young sister, Miss Georgiana Darcy, came to mind. He'd long entertained the idea of an alliance between his sister and his friend. He had gone so far as to discuss the scheme with his cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam, the second son of the Earl of Matlock as well as his sister's co-guardian. Given the disaster that nearly unfolded in Ramsgate between his sister and a much older man, a scoundrel named George Wickham, both Darcy and the Colonel conceded the merits of the scheme. Though Darcy believed no gentleman was really good enough for his sister, his friend Bingley, whom he knew his young sister adored, met his expectations better than anybody he knew. After seeing his friend nearly fall prey to the mercenary, matchmaking Mrs. Bennet, Darcy knew the time was rapidly approaching to advocate for an alliance that suited everyone. Elizabeth sat opposite her father in the small room in the back of the house, now officially designated as his new study. I'm on the heels of concluding another round of rather lengthy and at times contentious debate with Mr. Collins, opined Mr. Bennet. He exhaled a deep, resigned breath. I find myself particularly mindful that I have a legal responsibility as well as an ethical one to pass the estate to him intact, just as it was passed to me. Ceasing his speech, the gentleman set his pipe aside, arose from his chair and drifted over to the window. I have lost so much, and I do not intend to spend what's left of my days embroiled in costly litigation with Collins over what ought to be done as regards his rightful inheritance, especially given there's a less bothersome alternative. Rather than make an enemy of my cousin, there is a way for the two of us to partner in the scheme to rebuild the manor house. Papa, you know that I will be happy to do everything in my power to see all your fondest wishes for the estate unfold. Mr. Bennet turned and faced his daughter. That is precisely what I had hoped you would say, my dear Lizzie. For you see, there is a vital part you can play. I have already discussed this with Mr. Collins, and he and I are of mutual accord in our scheme. As he is Longbourn's heir apparent, he and I may be in a position to restructure the edicts of the entail to our mutual satisfaction. As it turns out, his terms were strikingly similar to what I had envisioned, with but one exception. This sounds interesting. What are the gentleman's terms, if I may ask? He cleared his throat. Before I disclose any of that, pray hear all I have to say. The damage to Longbourn House, while substantial, by no means rendered it completely unsalvageable. I am not a young man, my child, and with the entail on the estate such that it exists, I don't know that I have the fortitude to rebuild. However, if I knew that my own family would benefit from the endeavour, I would consider it a strong inducement to restore the house to its former state, perhaps enhance it with many of the modern conveniences I have been reading about. Her suspicions heightening and her patience wearing thin, Elizabeth said, Again, what are Mr. Collins' terms? He shall marry whichever of my daughters he chooses. Elizabeth coloured. She stared. Surely that ridiculous man has signalled Jane out as the future Mrs. William Collins, she silently considered. She had not failed to notice the way he leered at her elder sister whenever he thought no one was looking. She thought to protest the injustice that her sister should be subjected to such humiliation. "Papa, you are aware that Jane is in love with Mr. Bingley, and he is in love with her. I am very aware of the tender feelings in that quarter, and I have made Mr. Collins aware of them as well. No, it is not Jane whom he has chosen. If not Jane, then who? Mary. I should hate to see any of my sisters married to such a ridiculous man, but I suspect Mary will not be terribly disappointed." Indeed, though Mary was not one to engage in flights of fancy over the prospects for her future marital felicity, as was so often done by her two youngest sisters, her propensity to cite passages from Fordyce's sermons to any one of her sisters who would listen made her a likely candidate. "I tend to agree with you. However, it is not Mary either. I regret to inform you, my child, but it seems my cousin has set his cap on you." Elizabeth gasped aloud. She sprang from her seat. "Papa! Surely you did not go along with his proposition. The man is a fool. Surely misery of the acutest kind would accompany both of us all the days of our lives were such a union to take place." "My dear Lizzie, I assure you that you have not said anything that I have not considered myself, but these are extraordinary circumstances, desperate even. Such measures as my cousin and I have agreed to are the only viable options. He will not consider changing the terms of the entail otherwise, which means there is no possibility for a happy conclusion for the rest of your sisters." He drew nearer to her. "You know that I must rebuild if your sisters are to stand a chance of securing marriages with respectable gentlemen. Mr. Bingley likes Jane. It is my wish that he will do more, but until he has placed a ring on her finger, nothing is certain. Even then, it shall remain my responsibility to provide for our family for so long as I live. I shall not accept charity from that young man. It is unfortunate enough that I am indebted to every merchant in Meryton. Mr. Collins has also agreed that together we shall endeavour to enhance your sister's dowries substantially. Under the restructured entail, that stipulation will take effect after the two of you are married." Mr. Bennet shook his head. "Mind you, my child, were this a month or so earlier, I would not possibly entertain the idea of your accepting such a man. But the situation has drastically changed. I must now consider that if you were to marry the man, it would be a very good thing for our family." "Papa, you cannot be serious. How can you possibly advise me to enter into an alliance in which I would be wholly incapable of respecting my husband? Do not think I have come to this decision lightly. I know you well enough to know that such a marriage might well subject you to a severe degree of distress and discomfort, but I also know you well enough to know that you are a very clever girl. You are not designed for ill humour. You will find a way to make the most of what would otherwise be a bad situation." "I will not do it, Papa. I cannot do it."
"You can marry your cousin, Mr. Collins, and you will marry him."
"For you to disobey me in this matter, and to do otherwise, would very well be the means of garnering my fiercest disapprobation. I am certain neither of us would ever wish for such an unhappy outcome." He waved his hand in the air dismissively. "Now, run along, my child, and share the good news with your mother that you are amenable to accepting Mr. Collins's hand. I'm sure she will be pleased enough for both of you." Chapter 11. Such a Union. "Jane, what on earth is the matter?" Elizabeth asked when she saw her sister sitting alone in her room, staring out with her hand pressed to the window-pane. Jane said nothing, which encouraged Elizabeth to take the seat across from her. Elizabeth noticed her sister was clutching a letter. She reached for it. "What is this?" Elizabeth asked. "I received this earlier. It is a letter from Miss Bingley." "Oh? Has she invited you to dine at Netherfield again?" "I'm afraid not. She wrote to tell me their party has returned to town. She and her family departed soon after Mr. Darcy took his leave. In fact, she went out of her way to express her pleasure that her brother and Miss Georgiana Darcy are once again united in town, as well as her hope that she will soon be wishing them joy." "Miss Darcy?" Elizabeth exclaimed. "Jane, I find it hard to believe she would insinuate that anything beyond friendship exists between Miss Darcy and her brother, when you and I both know that is impossible. No, Lizzie, I cannot say such a thing with certainty. I have never met the young woman, but by all accounts she is everything a young woman ought to be. Who is to say what is the nature of their particular relationship? I dare say Mr. Darcy would not have allowed his friend to engage in an open courtship with you, knowing that his sister and that gentleman had the type of relationship that Miss Caroline Bingley implies. It is nothing more than a futile wish on her part. Believe me." Jane hastily folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. She brushed faint traces of fallen teardrops from her face and feigned a brave smile. "Enough talk about Mr. Bingley and me and what might have been. You seemed rather upset yourself upon entering the room. Pray, what is the matter?" Elizabeth had indeed entered the room with the intention of confessing her woes to her dearest sister. What she needed most was a sympathetic shoulder to cry on, someone who would, if nothing else, tell her that she was doing the right thing in opposing her father. Finding Jane preoccupied with her own problems, she supposed she ought to keep her own counsel. She told her sister as much, but Jane would not hear of it. What are sisters for if not to cry on each other's shoulders from time to time? Relieved by her sister's sweet compassion, bit by bit, Elizabeth confided in Jane the events that had unfolded earlier that day. Only Jane was nowhere near so sympathetic as Elizabeth had hoped she would be. True, she listened patiently to everything her younger sister had to say. Through it all she spoke hardly a word. "Jane, you have not said anything much. Pray you understand why I refuse to do as our father expects. Lizzie, I cannot tell you what to do. I can only say that were I to receive an offer of marriage from a respectable man, I would not be in such a rush to refuse him, especially when there is no guarantee of receiving another offer. Surely your concerns over Miss Bingley's insinuations about her brother's intentions compel you to speak this way. Surely you cannot be serious." "I am very serious. I speak nothing but the truth. Lizzie, I am nearly 23. By anyone's standards, I should have been married long ago. I like Mr. Bingley. Had he made me an offer of marriage, I surely would have accepted him, even though our acquaintance was of so short a duration. Our temperaments are very much alike, and I posit I would have been very happy. On the other hand, I have no reason to suspect that I would not be just as satisfied with another, so long as he was respectable. Regarding our cousin, Mr. Collins, can there be any two opinions with respect to his honourability? I know you like to suppose he's ridiculous, but I cannot ascribe those feelings to him. I rather suppose that he goes out of his way to make a good impression, but he means no harm. That is only because you always endeavour to see the good in others. You have yet to look at anyone and not find something to admire. Are you arguing that I am mistaken about our cousin? Is he not a good man? It truly sounds as though you think I ought to marry him as Papa instructs. I would never go so far as to advise you to do something to which you're so utterly opposed. You asked me for my opinion, and I gave it to you as honestly as I could. Only you can decide what is right for you." The import of Jane's words affected Elizabeth profoundly. The Bennet family's circumstances had long been wanting. Their current situation surely made each of the daughters' prospects even grimmer, all except Jane's, for she was certain for all that she saw of Bingley's comportment toward her sister, confirmed he was indeed in love with her. A faint voice inside Elizabeth whispered, "What if he does not?" Indeed, what if Jane was more attuned to the gentleman's heart than Elizabeth knew? Would Jane sacrifice herself for the Bennet family? "Jane," Elizabeth said, "your argument is not only compelling, but it is also quite sensible. Perhaps I ought not to be so hasty in deciding against our cousin." "Lizzie," Jane replied, her eyes questioning, "I appreciate your counsel more than you know, dearest Jane. And now I know precisely what I must do." Chapter 12. Rightful Place. The very next morning Mrs. Bennet saw to it that everything was arranged just so in order for Mr. Collins to have time alone with her second eldest daughter. Elizabeth began to suspect that everyone in her family knew exactly what was afoot. Not one of them protested when Mrs. Bennet promptly stood and commanded everyone, save Elizabeth, to come with her as soon as the gentleman entered the room. The gentleman wasted no time in putting forth his ardent entreaty. "My dear cousin Elizabeth," he began, "you can have no doubt as to the reason I now stand humbly before you. Almost as soon as I entered your father's house, I singled you out as the companion of my future life." He rambled on, speaking of his reasons for marrying, his role as a clergyman, and the expectations of his noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. If the situation were not so serious, Elizabeth would have deemed it laughable. Instead, Elizabeth stayed silent. "I am doing this for my family," she silently considered. "I am doing this for my family." Her silence the gentleman interpreted as satisfactory reassurance, and thus he continued his speech. "And now nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection." A sudden bout of light-headedness threatened to rob Elizabeth of her bearings. It would not do were she to faint, for surely the ridiculous man would read it as a confirmation of the eloquence of his speech and the power of his words to sweep a mere maiden off her feet. No, she would not faint. She simply stood there and listened to her ridiculous cousin as her father's admonishments re-echoed through her ears. "You must accept Collins for the greater good of the family. This is the best solution for all of us. You shall reside in Hunsford at the parsonage house with your husband, and I shall commence overseeing the rebuilding of the manor house. By the time I'm no longer of this earth, the house ought to be ready for you and your husband to assume your rightful place as master and mistress of Longbourn." Elizabeth had a sense of being outside her body, hovering high above, an observer of her own life story playing out before her. Memories of happier times echoed through her mind, sitting on her father's lap as he read to her, indeed taught her to read. The time she fell from a tree when she was 7, and he had been the one who attended her badly bruised knee. Most of all, she recalled basking in the adoration afforded a father's favourite child. Shall I attribute Papa's change to the fire that destroyed our home? A troubling thought ensued. Perchance he never changed at all. Perhaps he is the same man he has always been, and I am simply seeing him in a new light. Sounds emanating from behind the closed door brought her to her senses. Giggling, hushed voices. Her family was outside the door waiting for her to accept this man whom she practically abhorred. She could not accept him. She would not accept him. "Stop, sir! I beg you, stop!" Elizabeth heard herself scream. "I would not marry you if you were the last man in the world." With that, she spun round on her heels and bolted toward the door. Throwing it open, she stepped aside just enough for her mother and younger sisters to fall short of tumbling inside the room. Not bothering to reprimand them for eavesdropping, Elizabeth raced down the hall and out the door. Chapter 13. Every Complaint. For the first time in her life, Elizabeth had a sense of what it must be like to be all alone in the world. Having been escorted into the room later that same day, to settle the matter of her accepting Mr. Collins once and for all, she was not surprised to find her father taking her mother's side. He went so far as to state that from that point on, Elizabeth should consider herself a stranger not just to her mother but to him as well. His harsh words had cut like a knife. As suddenly as that, it felt as though her world had been turned upside down, as though her life as she always knew it had ended. To have one's own father utter such an unfeeling sentiment was utterly disheartening. "You and I shall be strangers to each other." How had she not realised that the indifference with which he'd always regarded his wife and his younger daughters would one day find its way to her? Her mother's biting words she could easily forgive, for they had been a near constant companion for so long as Elizabeth could remember. But not her father's. What more confirmation do I need than this to realise how little I ever knew about him? Escaping her seat, she commenced pacing the floor. Her disappointment with her father would no longer be repressed. To think she had, theretofore, secretly congratulated herself on being his favourite. Being his favourite had certainly spared her from being fodder for his biting wit, an often perverse inclination to laugh at his own family members, to ridicule them even, and sometimes in view of the public, and during those times when what his daughters and wife needed most was his support and understanding, his respect. Having his favour truly meant something to her. How was she to endure the loss of his esteem? True to his word, in the ensuing days, her father granted her a measure of civility reserved for strangers. Gone was the warmth in his address when she entered the room. Any attempt on her part to engage him in lively debate, as had been their favourite pastime, was met with disinterested distance. The strain of her relationship with her father, or rather lack thereof, was taking its toll on the rest of the family as well. Making things worse was Mr. Collins's continuing presence, along with his unmasked hope that in time Elizabeth would be compelled to change her mind. Elizabeth had but two choices. One was to go about her day-to-day existence as if nothing had changed. That also meant suffering her cousin's unwelcome courtship. So convinced was he that she only wanted sufficient wooing. She had her mother to thank for that. Those two were often seen with their heads together, no doubt plotting Elizabeth's ultimate surrender. The other choice was to leave Longbourn, to strike her own path in life. Mere days later she determined to do just that. Slipping into her father's study early one morning, Elizabeth sat in his chair and commenced writing a letter in explanation of her resolution. "Dearest Papa, now I have a sense of how my sisters must have felt for the better parts of their lives, and I am forced to consider that I do not like it. I do not like it at all. There are those, I am certain, who will think I am selfish and unfeeling because of what I am about to do. However, I cannot apologize for refusing to be true to my own self. I will not sacrifice my own sense of worth and claim to respectability for anyone, not even for you. Perhaps you are laughing as you read this letter. I would not be surprised. Laugh if you will, but that prospect will not deter me from saying what I must say. Think of this as a proclamation, if you will. A litany of every complaint I ever suffered, but decided to keep to myself for fear of your disapprobation, your derision, and your scorn, much as I have seen you exhibit towards my mother, your own wife, and my 3 younger sisters, your own daughters, through the years. My dearest Jane seems to have escaped the burden of your cutting wit, and for that I must give you credit. I have often boasted of my wont to laugh at the ridiculousness of others. I credit that trait to you, dear father. I never truly supposed I was causing anyone any serious harm. I never viewed my propensity to laugh at such follies as mean-spirited or uncaring. However, I am now forced to reconsider. From the instant Mr. William Collins entered our lives, what have you done but laugh at everything about him? His sycophantic propensities, his large lumbering presence, and his general absurdity. Now, after all that, you would have me marry this man. You would threaten that if I do not marry this man, that you and I will be strangers to each other. You would make light of your edict that I marry this man in the same breath that you would expound on how miserable I would then be, and you would laugh at the prospect of my inherent suffering in telling my mother. I am given cause to wonder if I ever truly knew you at all. Indeed, I am given cause to think the unthinkable. Is your edict that I am to marry Mr. William Collins not an attempt on your part to have me amend your own lapse? You are the head of the family, are you not? Why then, have you abdicated the task of securing our family's fate to me? How could you possibly say that you will not be motivated to rebuild Longbourn House after the fire if no one in your family stands to benefit from it? If you do not wish to rebuild the home in which your family has dwelled for decades upon decades, if you take no pride in seeing what once meant so much to so many standing proud and tall once again, then so be it. But do not suggest that your decision whether to do that which is right can have anything to do with me. It is not fair to place your burden on my back. Surely deep inside your heart you know it isn't. I pray with all my heart that you will not use this, the occasion of my leave-taking, as an impetus for another of your daughters to bear the weight of your burden. I take no pleasure in writing these words. In truth, doing so causes me immeasurable pain. It might very well be a sin for a child to confess his or her disappointment in a beloved parent openly, but be that as it may, my conscience will not allow me to remain silent. Before closing this letter, I feel I would be entirely remiss were I not to address another matter. I am more than a little disappointed in my mother for her lack of gratitude to Mr. Darcy, for saving Lydia from perishing in the fire and putting his own life in danger in so doing. I am embarrassed more than you know that she chose instead to wilfully misunderstand his intention. But I am not half so disappointed in my mother, whose business in life it is to see all her daughters married, as I am disappointed in you. I am even more disappointed that you would attempt to use my genuine feelings of gratitude against me, by suggesting that I have other motives for taking a view of what happened, which spares Mr. Darcy from a lifetime of regret for his heroic endeavour. In closing, I say do not worry about me. You can have no doubt of where I am going. I will be safe with Aunt and Uncle Gardner in town. Say goodbye to my sisters and assure them that I will write to them often. Should you, one day, change your mind and open your heart to accepting me with the degree of esteem warranted a child from a parent, I shall receive you with a far warmer generosity of spirit than you extended to me when last we were together. I will only add, may God bless you, your daughter E.B. After sealing the letter, Elizabeth positioned it on the desk so that her father would be certain to find it later that morning. She then went to the room she shared with her eldest sister. Exercising sufficient caution to avoid disturbing Jane's slumber, she gathered the few possessions she had, which fortunately included a little money that she had saved through her own economy and had tucked away in a hidden compartment of a book she had carried with her to Netherfield. Jane likely did not realise it, but in her own way Elizabeth had effectively said goodbye the night before. She headed to the door. Before quitting the room, she threw a cursory look over her shoulder at the things she never truly had time to consider her own. She did not know what would be the aftermath of taking the next step. All she knew was that she had to do it. Nothing could be worse than a life with her ridiculous cousin Mr. Collins. Time was of the essence, for she planned to board a stagecoach in Meryton. Proceeding at a swift pace, armed with a small baggage containing a handful of her belongings and a purse containing all the money she'd managed to save, Elizabeth realised that, in a way, that particular walk seemed no different from countless other early morning solitary escapes. Hurrying past the burned ruins of the manor house without looking back, for fear of succumbing to heartbreak over all the devastation the fire had cost her, she had cause to consider that this walk was painfully different indeed. She was saying goodbye, quite possibly forever, to a father she no longer recognised, and a place that was no longer her home. Chapter 14. Good Intentions. My courage always rises in times of peril, Elizabeth repeated to herself. A comforting affirmation indeed in the wake of being robbed on the street in broad daylight. When she was not bolstering her spirits with such much-needed mantras, she was chastising herself for wandering off from the coach at the changing station. Making matters worse, in her distressed state she had lost all track of time and had failed to return in time to board the public stagecoach headed to London, for which she had already arranged her passage. Stranded on the outskirts of town, she had no money, no baggage, indeed nothing but the clothes on her back. Elizabeth had no recourse but to prevail on the generosity of strangers to either assist her in returning to Longbourn, where she would be subjected to ridicule and caprice from her own father, or, conversely, in venturing to Cheapside. Shaken to her core, a plethora of warring emotions confounded her in the wake of events unfolding. She felt ill-used, preyed upon, even violated. But most of all she felt grateful that no serious assault had occurred against her person. Indeed, she had been robbed. Her reticule and all the contents within were gone. Her confidence had been severely shattered, and her trust in people in general forever tarnished. Some of these sentiments were oddly akin to those that had served as her constant companion since the fire. The feeling of helplessness in seeing her home burned to the ground, the feeling of homelessness, immediately returned with a passion. For now she was all alone in an unfamiliar town, helpless and indeed homeless. The prospect of wallowing in her tears for once again being forsaken by the heavens above was dismissed the instant it crossed her mind. This too I shall overcome. Elizabeth surveyed her environs. The picture before her did not make for a pleasant prospect. Enough people were moving about on the street, but all of them were of the male persuasion. She did not dare approach one of them. There was no hiding the fact that she was an unchaperoned, gently bred woman, easy prey for someone who lacked good intentions. Tiny raindrops pelting her face added to her sense of urgency. Appealing to a local innkeeper for temporary lodging and employment seemed the only way for her to proceed. Despite being a gentleman's daughter, reared with maids and servants to perform the very tasks she now contemplated taking on, Elizabeth knew she had no other choice. Besides, she had left Longbourn with some inclination of the manner of living she was leaving behind. Even an extended visit with her aunt and Uncle Gardner did not negate the possibility that she might one day be compelled to seek employment as a governess, a lady's companion, or even a lady's maid. A servant in an inn is a severe departure from either of the three, she silently considered. She sighed a deep breath. It is not as though I have a choice. The Dog and Duck was just up the street. Elizabeth had some familiarity with the establishment, having had tea there any number of occasions before on her travels between Longbourn and town. She would not presume that anyone there might recognise her, but she was comfortable enough with its usual patronage, at least to appeal to its innkeeper. All she needed was enough money to cover the fare to Cheapside. Once earned, she would be on her way. Thus resolved, she hastily made her way to the front door of the inn. Taking a deep breath, she silently acknowledged that once she stepped inside, her life would never be the same again. A second later she nearly collided with the gentleman who was quitting the inn just as she was entering. "Pardon me, sir," she begged, her eyes fixed on his broad chest. "Miss Elizabeth? Mr. Darcy?" The awkwardness of their situation was palpable. It needed not to be. Having resided under the same roof for so many weeks as they had, the two of them were more than indifferent acquaintances. It was only natural that they should behave toward each other accordingly. Now sitting across from each other at a table nearby the window, he explained his reason for being in that particular town at that particular time. He had concluded a visit with friends in the country, and he was returning to London. Now it was time for her to account for her being there, so far away from home without a chaperone for one, and most importantly without the means to continue on her journey. Elizabeth did not wish to confess that in her haste to leave Longbourn she had not written to her London relations to tell them she was coming to Cheapside. She did not want Mr. Darcy to think she was so imprudent as that. Besides, she was certain they would be in town. She and her aunt corresponded regularly, and there had been no mention of plans to be away. As for welcoming her into their home, Elizabeth was equally certain she would be received with open arms. In hindsight, she knew she should not have been quite so presumptuous. But in her haste to leave Longbourn, there had been no time to attend to such formalities, or so Elizabeth told herself. A part of her feared being talked out of her decision either by her Aunt Gardiner, her sister Jane, or even her friend Charlotte. Such were her thoughts as she attempted to paint a prettier picture of why she was now sitting across the table from Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, a man whom she had at times considered her worst critic, the man who was now listening patiently to her feeble excuse for finding herself in such an untenable situation, and offering her a solution that, mere hours ago, she never would have thought possible. Safe, comfort, transport to her relations' home in Cheapside. Mr. Darcy said, "I don't know that you have a choice, Miss Elizabeth. It is not as though I would leave you here, unchaperoned and beholden to the generosity of an innkeeper for temporary employment. If you suppose otherwise, you have gravely mistaken my character." He leaned forward in his chair. "I am here. I am more than happy to help. Allow me to be of service to you during this, your time of need." It was not as though her family was not indebted to him enough already, even if they chose not to acknowledge it. No doubt he must consider the Bennets in general a terribly mercenary lot. Thinking to protest, she said, "I will not accept charity, Mr. Darcy." "Then you must not think of it as such. Under normal circumstances I would applaud you for your fierce desire to assert your independence, refusing to rely on anyone but yourself. You were robbed. Surely that unfortunate truth alters the balance of things. Do you not agree?" Shifting his weight in his chair, he said, "If you are concerned about the impropriety of accepting my offer, I shall be happy to ride outside the carriage with my driver as a means of easing your discomfort. You shall enjoy complete privacy." "I could never impose on you in such a manner, sir. It is raining after all." "The prospect of spending time in the rain is far more tenable than you seeking temporary employment in an inn, Miss Bennet. Besides, I would never forgive myself if I failed to convince you to accept my offer for assistance. When you state your arguments in such persuasive terms as that, how can I object? I would not wish to see you blame yourself." "Then it is agreed. You will allow me to escort you to Cheapside." "Only on one condition," Elizabeth said. "And what condition is that?" "You must not allow yourself to be inconvenienced by this arrangement. You must agree to ride inside the carriage, else I shall never forgive myself for being the means of you suffering the pouring rain." "Agreed. My carriage awaits you, Miss Bennet. Shall we proceed?" Chapter 15. A Steady Pace. Having maintained a steady pace for the better part of the journey to London, the carriage slowed a bit. Elizabeth prayed they had not met with some unforeseen mishap on the road. The last thing she wanted was a delay. Try as she might, Elizabeth could not ignore the fact there was a certain intimacy inherent in a man and a woman being confined in such close-fitting quarters as a well-appointed barouche carriage afforded, just the two of them with no possibility of interruption, and the ever-increasing evidence of the gentleman's virility so plain to see. She had noticed his aroused state before, at Netherfield. Then any fixation on his increasing discomfort had been easy enough to dismiss merely by escaping the room. Now, all alone with him, in his carriage, on the quiet country road, there was no escaping. Is he asleep? She could not tell. He had been reading earlier, but he'd since lowered his book, tilted his head back, and closed his eyes. If only she had a book to read, anything to distract her. What manner of country party might the gentleman have attended that has rendered him so weary so soon after his departure? She could not help wondering. Any number of gentlemanly pursuits crept into her busy mind. She immediately chastised herself. Whatever Mr. Darcy was doing can be none of my concern. She pulled the curtains open to peer outside, but she discovered soon enough that staring outside her window at the grey countryside offered very little appeal. The rain splashing against the carriage's window-pane offered a paltry prospect in comparison to the view inside the carriage, Mr. Darcy. She always knew he was a handsome man, indeed, the handsomest man of her acquaintance. As he was quite possibly blessed with everything the mortal heart must desire most, she was certain that those in his sphere must regard him as one of the most eligible bachelors in all of England. There was that special something in his air that must certainly command the respect of every gentleman, the hopes and dreams of every mother, and the fancy of every young woman. Could he truly be engaged to marry his cousin? She immediately rebuked herself. Why should it matter to me whether he is engaged to anyone? I who have nothing by way of material possessions. Thoughts of him would not cease, and Elizabeth recalled her cousin's account of Mr. Darcy's presumed intended Miss Anne de Bourgh. She is a most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine herself says that in point of true beauty, Miss de Bourgh is far superior to the handsomest of her sex, because there is that in her features which marks the young lady of distinguished birth. Her wont to laugh at the ridiculousness of others would have rendered her quite the hypocrite were she to fail to see the irony in her situation in comparison to Miss de Bourgh's. Here I sit across from the gentleman, practically homeless, without even a purse to call my own. She covered her eyes with both hands, hoping to wipe away such thoughts. It was no use. Pouring her eyes over Mr. Darcy was infinitely more appealing. She hated to admit it, but she was not entirely immune to this man. Visions of the moment he raised her hand to his lips and brushed a soft kiss on her knuckles the night of the Netherfield ball often crept into her dreams, but only in her dreams, for her every waking thought of late centred on her undesirable plight of being disdained by her father, scorned by her mother, and foolishly pursued by her ridiculous cousin. She shook her head to push away such thoughts. What had been the purpose of her fleeing her situation at Longbourn, if she only meant to carry the painful weight of her sufferings everywhere she went? Something to read was exactly what she needed to escape from everything. The carriage hit a rut in the road, and the book he'd been reading slipped from his hand and landed on the seat with a slight thump. He did not move. He's sound asleep. Do I dare reach over and retrieve his book? I dearly need something else to focus on, else the sight of him shall drive me mad. Just as she leaned forward and reached out her hand, he shifted a bit, affording an even more telling view of himself. She jerked her hand away. Half nervous, half relieved, Elizabeth leaned back. Resuming her former attitude, Elizabeth exhaled. She had only herself to blame for the awkwardness of her situation. Mr. Darcy had offered to ride up front with his driver, thus affording her the privacy of his carriage. She had been the one insisting he ride inside with her. Foolish girl! What on earth was I thinking? Chapter 16. His Responsibility. When at last they reached Gracechurch Street, Elizabeth whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Their arrival could not have been better timed, for the rain had ceased, and the sun began peeking from behind the clouds. She was in the middle of rehearsing a proper goodbye to the gentleman, whom she suspected she might never see again when his action caught her by surprise. "What are you doing, sir?" "I intend to accompany you inside. It is only right that I should greet your relations and explain the circumstances of our travelling together." "No!" Elizabeth exclaimed. Softening her tone, she said, "What I mean to say is that I am deeply indebted to you for seeing to my safe arrival, but I do not think it is necessary for me to delay your own travel plans a moment longer." Mr. Darcy resumed his former attitude. "I will remain in the carriage until I see you go safely inside. You must allow me that." Seeing that the gentleman was determined to have his way, Elizabeth acquiesced. She accepted the driver's offer of assistance descending the carriage, and without looking back hurried up the stairs. The knocker was not out, which was a bad sign indeed. Not to be so easily dissuaded, Elizabeth rapped on the door as forcefully as she could manage. She waited. She knocked again. No one came. Seeing this, Mr. Darcy, who by now was standing outside the carriage, walked toward the steps. Taking his time climbing the stairs, he met Elizabeth halfway. "It appears no one is here. What do you intend to do, Miss Elizabeth? Is there somewhere else that I might take you? Have you other relations in London?" Elizabeth said, "No, I'm afraid I do not. It never once occurred to me that my aunt and uncle would not be here when I arrived. Darcy did not intend to relinquish his responsibility to protect her. Not now. A gentlewoman alone on the streets was unfathomable. I know this sounds a bit untoward, but perhaps you will consider coming with me to my townhouse." He cleared his throat. "My sister is there as well as her companion, a Mrs. Annesley, which must certainly alleviate any concerns you may have about propriety. You have yet to meet my sister, but I am confident she will consider it an honour to have you call on her. Your sister does not even know me, sir. She may well think it is an impertinence for me to arrive so unexpectedly. No, my sister is looking forward to making your acquaintance, I assure you. How is that even possible, Mr. Darcy? I wrote to her when I was in Hertfordshire, and I mentioned you, as well as your sister, Miss Bennet." Elizabeth could not fathom why he would have done such a thing, but now was not the time to debate the matter. People were beginning to take notice of the fine carriage on the street, as well as the tall, handsome man with the noble mien who stood too close to her. She could not say that she knew any of the onlookers by name, but she had been on Gracechurch Street enough times to place some of their faces. No doubt some of them knew who she was. If nothing else, they knew her as Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner's young niece from the country. Darcy said, "As I have no intention of leaving you here, I would say there is no alternative. Later, after I have my man ascertain your relations' whereabouts, I shall arrange for your safe return here." Not long thereafter, Elizabeth shifted nervously in her seat. She had been in this part of London enough times to know that she was not in Cheapside any more. Elizabeth had seen the magnificent homes lining either side of the street. Never once did she suppose she would be visiting one. Attempting to take her mind off the impending meeting with Mr. Darcy's sister, Elizabeth peered out the window. Soon we shall be passing Hyde Park, she pondered. She was so very uncomfortable by now. Mr. Darcy must have detected this. "Miss Elizabeth," he began, "pray tell me what is troubling you." "Sir, are you certain your sister will not view my arriving at your home under the guise of calling on her as impertinent?" "I can assure you that she will not. It will be her pleasure to make your acquaintance." Darcy leaned forward and took Elizabeth's hand in his, prompting her to silently question if he knew what he was about. The two of them gazed into each other's eyes. Where is the fierce young lady whose acquaintance I made in Hertfordshire not so long ago? Did he not realise he was brushing his thumb gently over her knuckles, her eyes holding fixed with his, her heart slammed against her chest? How devastatingly handsome was this man, who caused her to entertain thoughts that a gently bred woman ought not to conceive. Slowly she withdrew her hands. His touch lingered still. Wanting to add a bit of levity to the air, she half smiled. "Then I take it your sister is nothing at all like Miss Caroline Bingley." He looked at her in genuine dismay. "Indeed she is not." "You must perish the thought," he said, leaning back against his seat. "Will you tell me about Miss Darcy, sir?" "I might, but I would rather you form your own opinion. Besides, I have not the time to do my sister justice as we are here." The carriage pulled to a stop just as he finished his speech. She drew a deep breath in anticipation of the formidable introduction to the gentleman's sister. The sudden awareness that she would be doing so in the same clothes she'd been travelling in, indeed robbed in, gave her pause, but only for a second or two, for there was absolutely nothing to be done about that. Perchance she would have a moment or two to refresh herself first. At least that was her hope. How importantly Elizabeth wanted to make a favourable impression on the young woman, albeit for reasons even she did not fully comprehend. Chapter 17. Every Moment. "Miss Darcy and Mrs. Annesley are not expected to return from their visit at Matlock House until later this afternoon, sir," said the butler in response to Darcy's request to have his sister join him in the drawing-room. However disappointed Darcy was to hear that his sister was out, Elizabeth could not rightly discern. Her own disappointment was palpable. Having spent so much time alone in the gentleman's company already, the thought that her discomfort would soon be lessened by the addition of his sister to their party had calmed her considerably. Not wishing to be a further burden to the gentleman, Elizabeth said, "Sir, you're not under any obligation to entertain me while I await your sister's return. I assure you it is my pleasure to sit and wait with you. But surely I must be keeping you from attending more urgent matters. Supposing you and I had parted in Cheapside as originally planned, what would you be doing upon your arrival here?" Darcy said, "The first thing I normally do when I arrive in London after a long journey is retire to my room for a change of clothing and the like." Elizabeth said, "I should not wish to keep you, sir. If I were at my aunt's, I would be doing the same, I assure you. I am more than happy to have an apartment prepared for you. That way you may refresh yourself as well as enjoy some time at your own leisure before making my sister's acquaintance." Elizabeth did not wish to argue with him on this point, especially since she would have liked nothing better than what he had recommended, but the thought of further inconveniencing him after everything else he had done for her met with a bit of reluctance on her part. She told him as much. "It is no trouble at all. Pardon me, Miss Elizabeth, I shall not be away long." Darcy went to his housekeeper and asked her to make arrangements for his guest. Rather than return to Elizabeth as he said, he went instead to his own apartment. It was far better that he left Elizabeth in the hands of one of the female servants for the next couple of hours or so. It was not as though he did not enjoy her company. On the contrary, the problem was he was enjoying her company far too much, especially the time they spent alone. When Elizabeth was shown to the room Mr. Darcy had his housekeeper prepare for her, she was delighted to see that he had ordered a hot bath for her as well. This manner of consideration on his part was far more than she had expected. Walking about the room, she was even more surprised to see a satin dress, slippers, even ladies' undergarments placed on the bed. She felt the colour spread all over her body just thinking that he had made such arrangements for her. She did not think it was her place to object to his courtesy with the maid who was busily preparing her bath. Instead, she went to the bed and ran her fingers over the dress. It was exquisite. She did not think she could possibly wear anything as fine as this. "This is exquisite," she said, speaking softly to no one in particular. The maid stopped what she was doing and hurried to Elizabeth's side. "I beg your pardon, madam." "I said this gown is exquisite. Does it belong to Miss Darcy?" "No, madam, the gown does not belong to Miss Darcy." "Then to whom does it belong?" The thought that Mr. Darcy might have a lady friend whom he entertained in his home did not sit very well with her, albeit for reasons she could not quite comprehend given the nature of her relationship with the gentleman or lack thereof. "No, I should not have asked. I don't suppose he meant for it to be a secret. This dress belonged to the master's mother. He chose it himself. He said you might like to wear it this evening." Elizabeth swallowed. His mother's? Did she dare don something so personal? On the other hand, he had been the one to pick out the gown. Surely he must know what he is about. Besides, she needed to wear something when she emerged from her bath. She supposed she might have asked the maid to do what was needed to freshen her own attire, but the gown Mr. Darcy picked out was so lovely. If he wished to see her donning such a beautiful gown, who was she to disappoint him after all he had done for her? Elizabeth gave herself over to the servant's care. Considering the manner of the day she'd endured, she really thought she deserved such pampering. There would be time enough to worry about what was to be her fate later. For now, she simply wanted to give in to this feeling of being warm and protected, and much to her delight after the manner of her hasty departure from Longbourn village, cared for. After getting dressed for dinner, Elizabeth went downstairs in search of the library. From what she had heard of Mr. Darcy's library at Pemberley, she surmised the library in his London townhouse might also be something. Immediately upon entering the room, the intoxicating smell of books, rich leather upholstery and mahogany, and a roaring fire assaulted all her senses at once. She breathed in deeply. She glanced around the room, studying each and every corner. "I could spend a lifetime in this room," she considered. A knowing smile etched across her lips. This is exactly the kind of library I might have expected to find in Mr. Darcy's home. She espied a ladder affixed to one of the stacks. She was half tempted to cross the room to climb a rung or two, when she heard the door opening. "I was told I might find you here." Elizabeth startled a little. Turning to face him, she said, "This room boasts of such magnificent beauty." He nodded. "Indeed, you look lovely." "I thank you for allowing me to borrow this lovely dress. How could you have known what a perfect fit it would be?" "Let us say that I was hopeful. After studying her in silence for another second or so, he said, "Come, my sister has returned from Matlock House. She's in the drawing-room, very eager to make your acquaintance." As the two of them proceeded down the long hallway leading to the drawing-room, the tumult of Elizabeth's feelings was at every moment increasing. Added to the fact that she was wearing a gown that belonged to the late mother of the young woman whom she was about to meet, was the uncertainty of what the brother may have said about her in his letters from Hertfordshire, as well as in explanation of her being at his London townhouse. Not knowing how much of her situation she might be called upon to conceal was no small disturbance of her composure. Likely having sensed this, Darcy placed his hand on the small of her back. Though initially startled by such intimacy, she took it as a measure of reassurance, a very welcome one, although an instant later he tucked his hand once again behind his back. Moments later, Elizabeth and Darcy entered the room. She could not say whether she was more astonished or delighted when a young woman with fair hair and a rather angelic countenance sprang from her seat and greeted them at the door. Darcy introduced the two young ladies in the usual way. Thereafter they took their seats and polite conversation ensued. Elizabeth was glad for those instances when the two siblings spoke of matters pertaining to Miss Darcy's visit with her Fitzwilliam relations, Lord and Lady Matlock, for such occasions allowed her to study her new acquaintance with impunity. She knew from having heard earlier accounts that the young lady was 16. Even at such a young age, Miss Darcy was rather tall, her figure was formed, and her appearance womanly and graceful. Elizabeth recalled Miss Caroline Bingley's excessive praise of the young woman who now sat across from her. "I really do not think Georgiana Darcy has her equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments." She smiled a little in spite of herself, for unlike Miss Bingley, Miss Darcy's manners were perfectly unassuming and gentle. Elizabeth did not doubt one bit the extent of the young lady's accomplishments. Indeed, she seemed to be just what a young lady ought to be. Another part of Miss Bingley's letter to Jane crossed Elizabeth's mind. The affection she inspires in Louisa and myself is heightened into something still more interesting, from the hope we dare entertain of her being here after our sister. A part of her clung to the notion that a possible alliance between Mr. Bingley and Miss Darcy was merely wishful thinking on Miss Bingley's part. She glanced at Mr. Darcy. Might he entertain the same hope for his sister? Not wishing to think poorly of either of the Darcys, who, for all intents and purposes, were more than gracious towards her, Elizabeth resolved to put all such thoughts out of her mind. Darcy and Elizabeth once again found themselves alone after dinner. Prior to going into the dining parlour, Darcy's man arrived with information from Cheapside. The gardener's housekeeper, who reportedly had been away from the house earlier in the day, had advised him of the family's abrupt departure from town to attend an ailing relation, and their plan to return the very next day. Wanting to avoid further imposing on the Darcys, Elizabeth had immediately thought to take her leave of Darcy House that evening. At Miss Darcy's insistence, Elizabeth was persuaded to stay the night at least. She suffered sentiments of worry mixed with intrigue when Miss Darcy had complained of a headache shortly after the meal, and begged to retire early for the evening. Concerned for her charge's well-being, Mrs. Annesley accompanied the younger woman to her apartment and did not return. Not wishing to see an early end to his own evening, Darcy prevailed upon Elizabeth to play something for him on the pianoforte. He was pleased by her easy acquiescence, and made no attempt to disguise his delight. Hardly a day had passed since he left Hertfordshire that he did not think of the beguiling young woman. His time away in the country with friends on the heels of his return to London was meant to divert his attentions. His efforts had been in vain. How surprised he was to come across her on his return to town. And how fortunate for him to have been in the position to be of service to her during a time when she needed it most. Comfortably settled by the fire, Darcy's mind drifted to the all-too-vivid dream he had some hours earlier in the carriage, a dream not unlike those he had too many times to count since making Elizabeth's acquaintance. How ironic that he dreamed of being with her in the circumstances much the same as those that existed at present, time alone in his townhouse. He dreamed of making love to her. One by one he recounted each moment, how it started, first a look, and then a touch of his hand on her face. The first contact of his fingers trailing her bare arms eliciting a soft moan, of moving even closer to her, of her accepting his advances thus far and of him kissing her lips softly, testing her willingness to allow more. It will not do, It simply will not do." He brushed his hands across his face. He chastised himself for indulging in such fantasies, especially at such a time as that. He was a gentleman, and she was a gentleman's daughter, even if she was estranged from her family. That was even more reason to control his carnal desires for her. She needed protection, and that is what he meant to offer her. Protection. I dare not be too hard on myself. It is not as though anything will ever become of my yearning for her. I posit it would be unnatural not to indulge in such flights of pleasure. A warm-blooded man can dream. Can he not? Indeed, a man can dream. "Pardon me, Miss Bennet," he said, standing to stretch his long legs. She ceased playing and gazed at him questioningly. The look she bestowed threatened to take his breath away. Upon first meeting her, he had carelessly complained to his friend Bingley that she was not handsome enough to tempt him. He now realized just how much she tempted him indeed. Thinking she was one of the handsomest women of his acquaintance, she tempted him more than any woman he had ever known. "I think I shall retire for the evening. Shall I accompany you to your apartment?" Elizabeth's heartbeat raced. "Indeed, you may accompany me anywhere." She shook her head to wash away the wanton thoughts that were becoming all too familiar whenever the two of them were alone. Such occasions were oddly comforting to her. Why am I entertaining ideas that no proper young woman ought to entertain whenever this man and I are within 2 feet of each other? It is not as though I shall ever act on them. Perhaps that explained it. Never in a million years would she act on such improper impulses, and thus she was perfectly safe contemplating them. "No," she responded quickly. "What I meant to say is I think I will remain downstairs for a while longer. I think I shall return to the library. I should very much like to obtain some reading material. Let it not be said that I spent an entire evening in a home that boasts of having such an excellent library, and I did not avail myself of its pleasures. Then allow me to accompany you, for I find myself in want of new reading materials. Perhaps we will both spend the next several hours immersed in pleasurable escape." She arched her brow. Did he really mean to insinuate what she thought? Darcy said, "That is to say, literary escape that only a good book can afford." Elizabeth nodded. Thank heavens for that. She did not think it would take very much at all for the man to entice her into a pleasurable escape of any kind. Spending time alone with Mr. Darcy was becoming far too comfortable. Past thinking that he merely looked at her to find fault as had been her favourite complaint during the earliest days of their acquaintance, she endeavoured to persuade herself that he now looked at her as a man looked at his charge because for whatever reason he had taken it upon himself to be her protector. Not that she would argue with that. What young woman who was practically alone in the world would not relish having her own knight in shining armour? Chapter 18. Much to consider. The fire, his second eldest daughter's disobedience and subsequent removal from his home, albeit by her own accord, had taken quite a toll on Mr. Bennet's sensibilities as well as his demeanour. As difficult a decision as it had been to advocate on behalf of an alliance between his cousin, William Collins, and one of his own daughters, he thought that dark period would be behind him. By now, he supposed he would be free to sequester himself away from his wife, his remaining unmarried daughters, from everyone. Instead, he found himself right back where he had started, offering up another daughter to the gentleman. Your dear wife made it abundantly clear to me that the eldest Bennet daughter was soon to be married to Mr. Charles Bingley when I first arrived, and singled her out as the object of my affections. Indeed, everyone thought that young man would make my eldest an offer, but then he went away, which is most advantageous for you. Do I have your assurance, sir, that your eldest daughter is blessed with more refined tastes and sensibilities than your second eldest? I shall consider it an insult of the acutest kind should a subsequent proposal meet with the same outcome as my initial application to one of your daughters. As charming as I am sure all my fair cousins are, they are by no means the only worthy candidates in England. Indeed, I have had occasion to meet any number of other young ladies since my arrival in Hertfordshire who would satisfy my expectation as well as those of my noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, of what an excellent wife ought to be. Mr. Bennet cringed deep down inside. Were he in possession of a stronger hand, had it not been for the devastating fire, he would never give consideration to such a ridiculous man. In such case as the situation before him, he really felt he had no choice. Mind you, Mr. Collins, there is no reason to look elsewhere for an acceptable bride. My Jane is a very sensible young woman. Her temperament would never allow her to do anything other than what is expected of her. Indeed, your future marital felicity with my eldest daughter is assured." An hour later, Mr. Bennet paced the floor. The thought that he ought to have spoken with his daughter before promising her to his cousin weighed heavily on his mind. Heaven forbid he would have to go to Collins again the next time to offer his third daughter, Mary. The entire time he had been speaking, Jane had been staring out the window. Ceasing his pacing, he said, "Jane, my dear, surely you must know there is a strong possibility that the young gentleman from town may never return. Mr. Bingley strikes me very much as the sort of young man who falls in love very easily whenever he is tempted by an angelic smile." Conceding that her father's opinion of her former lover was not very different from her own sentiments of late, Jane lowered her eyes in acquiescence. At length she spoke. "Papa, I have listened to every word you have said, and now I have my own request, if you will allow it." "Pray, what is it?" "You have given me much to consider. May I have some time alone to ponder the implications of it all?" Relief spread across Mr. Bennet's countenance. "Indeed, my child. I only ask that you do not take too long. I fear Mr. Collins's patience is wearing thin." Jane smiled a little. She said nothing. Standing, she curtsied and then quit the room. She set off on the path leading to Netherfield Park. Not that she expected to find anyone there. In fact, the house had been closed until such time as its master returned. Still, she had entertained the idea of one day being Netherfield's next mistress. Going along with her father's scheme would render such a possibility entirely moot. She could not abandon her hopes completely without one final look at the place. Jane's stamina was no match for that of her sister Elizabeth, who was always considered a great walker, and thus her solitary foray consisted of several starts and stops. This suited her perfectly well, considering she had much to contemplate. Thoughts of a more practical kind accompanied her on her return from Netherfield. She began to suppose Mr. Bingley merely had been dallying with her emotions all along, not because he was malicious. No, to her way of thinking, he was one of the kindest, most amiable young men she had ever known. He had not been the first gentleman to shower her with adoration in one instance, and abandon his admiration the next with a hasty, ill-timed defection. They never said they would return, and in every instance they never did. Mr. Collins, on the other hand, was right there, ready and willing to propose to her. Indeed, he would be the first, and quite possibly the last, she considered. Marriage proposals were scarce in the limited society of Meryton. Her neighbour Charlotte Lucas was a testament to that. At 27, Charlotte still had not secured a husband. Although younger than Charlotte by at least 4 years, Jane was too sensible not to realise that Charlotte's fate might one day be her own. Great was Jane's surprise upon looking up and seeing the object of her musings just ahead, on the path leading to Longbourn. The two ladies hurried to greet each other. Ever observant, Charlotte appealed to Jane, wanting to know what was the matter. After explaining away her appearance as a result of her nostalgic stroll to Netherfield, Jane, who by now was wishing for someone to confide in, began to recount all the morning's events to her friend and neighbour. Charlotte listened in silence for the better part of Jane's account. After nodding at all the appropriate times, it was her turn to speak. "Have you written to Eliza in town to hear what she has to say about your father's scheme?" Charlotte asked. "I have not. My father only confided his plan to me this morning. That said, it would be no use seeking my sister's opinion on the matter, for I know precisely what she would say. For all intents and purposes, Lizzie and I have already had this conversation. I suppose you're referring to Lizzie's own refusal to marry Mr. Collins and her subsequent leave-taking." Charlotte must have read the surprise in Jane's face on hearing this. "Surely you must know that Lizzie discussed her rejection of Mr. Collins's hand with me. She and I have always been close. You need not be concerned that I might discuss such a sensitive matter with anyone else. You're correct. The two of you have always been such intimate friends. I sometimes wonder if I had been more supportive of my sister's strong stance against marrying our cousin, would she have remained here at Longbourn? I do not know that it would have made a significant difference. I believe it was your father's indifference that bore the heavier share of the reason she left. And now I find myself in a similar situation, with the difference being that I do not find the prospect of marrying my cousin nearly so intolerable." Do you mean to say that you are considering your father's scheme? What of your affection for Mr. Bingley? Oh, Charlotte, I suppose there is a part of me that will forever cherish the time I spent in Mr. Bingley's company. What young woman does not cherish the idea of being hopelessly adored by such an amiable and handsome young man? However, I am not getting any younger, and I begin to fear that if I do not seize this chance to marry, I may never have another. Besides, Mr. Collins is decent and honourable. There is no reason I should not be just as happy with him as any other. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. Charlotte smiled. Dearest Jane, I do not imagine I could have uttered such sentiments better. She took the younger woman by the hand and squeezed it gently. It sounds as though you have made your decision. Jane smiled a little. Indeed. I believe I know exactly what I must do. She whispered a silent prayer. I sincerely hope Lizzie will find it in her heart to understand. Chapter 19. An Inconvenience. Your uncle and I were half tempted to forego spending Christmas in Hertfordshire this year, what with the fire and the inherent inconvenience of all our family descending upon the dower house. Although I have never had occasion to go inside, from what I remember having seen of it from the outside, I would say it is rather modest in size. However, your father invited us specifically. I believe he harbours the hope that you will accompany us, Mrs. Gardiner said, squeezing her niece's hand. Did he say that? Not in so many words. However, I do not believe I am exaggerating in stating the inference was clear. The Gardiners had always felt obliged to uphold the family tradition of visiting Longbourn village at Christmas. Indeed, this was one time of year that Elizabeth always looked forward to when all her family spent time together. Elizabeth said, I understand, Aunt, and I applaud your family devotion, but I simply cannot be a party to it this year, perhaps never again. I am certain you know what you are about. That being said, it will not be the same without you. Yes, she responded. I know what an inconvenience it will be for you, to say nothing of what it means to the household servants, who no doubt have long-standing plans to visit their own families. Pray, do not concern yourself with such matters, my dear. I shall arrange for you to spend time with one of our friends in town. You remember meeting my intimate friend, Mrs. Blakely, do you not? I am sure she will be delighted to have you join her. She will enjoy your companionship immensely. At the moment, a servant entered the room and announced the arrival of a caller for Elizabeth. Immediately the question crossed her mind of who would be visiting her. Her aunt's countenance conveyed a similar inquiry. Both ladies arose from their seats to greet the visitor. In walked Miss Georgiana Darcy. Although they had exchanged letters, Elizabeth had not seen the young woman since the evening they initially made each other's acquaintance. Miss Darcy's companion, Mrs. Annesley, also entered the room. Elizabeth made the requisite introductions in the usual way. When she could, she said, Miss Darcy, this is a surprise, albeit a welcome one. Indeed, said Mrs. Gardiner. Any friend of my niece's is always welcome. I thank you for your kindness, Miss Darcy replied to the older woman. To what do we owe the pleasure of this visit? Elizabeth asked. I was concerned, having read in your letter the uncertain nature of your plans for Christmas. I thought I might come here and personally invite you to spend the holiday with me at Darcy House. You see, my brother has had a change in plans, and we will not be travelling to Derbyshire as we often do at this time of year. You need not have come all this way. You might have easily have dispatched a missive. Perhaps I might have, but then you might just as easily have declined such an impersonal invitation. I know you are far too generous to deny my petition if made in person. Actually, my aunt and I were speaking on this very topic before you joined us. I believe my plans are not so uncertain as I had supposed. Does that mean you will be returning to Hertfordshire after all? Miss Darcy asked, half eager on Elizabeth's behalf, half disappointed on her own. No. That is to say, my aunt has offered to arrange for me to visit one of her friends here in town. Is that not true? Elizabeth asked, a silent appeal of sorts to her aunt. As I have yet to speak with my friend, she will have no reason to be disheartened should you elect to spend the holiday elsewhere. Miss Darcy said, while I, on the other hand, will be very disappointed if you do not accept my invitation. Pray, you will come, Miss Bennet. It would mean so much not only to me, but to my brother as well. Your brother? Indeed. He speaks very fondly of you. He was delighted upon hearing that you and I have corresponded regularly since we made each other's acquaintance. Is your brother aware that you are here, Miss Darcy? More importantly, is he aware that you have invited me to spend Christmas in his home? I assure you that nothing I do escapes my brother's notice. That is hardly a definitive response. Let me say this. When I told my brother that you and I have corresponded regularly, and how I long to see you again to increase our acquaintance, he was very pleased with the idea. I know how much he admires you. I speak not only for myself, but for my brother as well. You are very welcome in our home. After carrying on in this manner for a little while longer, it was thus decided that Elizabeth would indeed spend Christmas Eve at Mr. Darcy's townhouse as his sister's guest. All in all, no one would have any cause to repine. Mrs. Gardiner was pleased that her beloved niece would be among friends, and likewise Miss Darcy was delighted to be once again in company with Elizabeth. If Elizabeth had any doubts at all, she did not express them aloud. Still, the thought of what it must mean to be once again in Mr. Darcy's home accompanied her for the next several days and nights. Chapter 20. Secretly Pleased. Darcy was secretly pleased upon learning from Georgiana that not only would Miss Elizabeth Bennet be a guest at his home on Christmas Eve, but she would be staying there until her London relations returned to town after Christmas. Away from her Hertfordshire relations, Elizabeth was even more charming in Darcy's estimation. Indeed, he had taught himself to forget completely how much he did not like her mother and her younger sister, Miss Lydia Bennet. The idea of Elizabeth and his own sister as friends pleased him very much. Alone in his study, awaiting the arrival of one of his guests, Darcy threw a reflective glance over the events of the evening thus far. Seeing his sister and Elizabeth engaged in private tete-a-tete was a pleasant change, for often in such gatherings Georgiana frequently begged to be excused rather than subject herself to the likes of Miss Caroline Bingley. It had not escaped his notice that Miss Bingley's behaviour towards Elizabeth was much the same as it had always been when they were all together in Hertfordshire, haughty and condescending. Having sent word by his butler to request Miss Caroline Bingley join him in his study after dinner, he meant to put a stop to her mean-spiritedness before the evening progressed any further. The eager young woman might as well have commenced dancing on the ceiling, having received Mr. Darcy's special invitation. It could only mean one thing. Finally, he intends to offer his hand in marriage. She stopped in front of a large mirror and examined herself from head to toe. She credited the particular gown she was wearing to being the impetus for his impending proposal. I always suspected he preferred me in this shade. After pinching her cheeks, she went on her merry way. Visions of everything she would do to redecorate his townhouse, her future townhouse, accompanied her every footstep. Making a mental note here, another there, she surmised it would take years to bring everything to her liking. One of the first orders of business was replacing the awful picture of the judge just outside Darcy's study with one of her own. The idea of who would be the fortunate London master commissioned to capture her likeness sprang into her mind. Oh, I shall not think of that now, she mused. Not while there are so many other matters to entertain. After a quick rap on the door, the young lady waltzed into the room. Seeing the gentleman who had captured her heart almost from the first moment of their acquaintance, she went directly to where he sat, waiting patiently for her by the fireplace. "You're alone?" Mr. Darcy said, standing and bowing almost imperceptibly. "Indeed I am. I know you recommended I have my maid accompany me, but are such concerns really important, Mr. Darcy? You and I have spent enough time in company to allow the occasional liberty of privacy, have we not?" His expression, although unreadable, bolstered her hopes. The gentleman sat, resuming his former attitude. "I suppose you are wondering why I asked to see you, Miss Bingley," said he, no doubt as eager to say what he had to say as she was eager to hear it, that he was sitting leisurely on the settee which boasted enough room for two, as opposed to one of the opposite chairs told her all she needed to know. Taking her place beside him, and easing ever so close, she said, "Indeed, I have some idea. What say you to dismissing the formalities? I beg your pardon. There is no one here save the two of us. Pray address me by my Christian name, Caroline." "Miss Bingley?" She placed a finger to his lips. "Caroline." Darcy moved to put a respectable distance between them. "It seems I have given you the wrong impression in asking to see you. Come now, Mr. Darcy, have you and I not danced around this moment for so long as we have known each other? This moment? Indeed, the moment when you finally admit that of all the women of your acquaintance there is but one for you, me. Your being here has everything to do with a woman of my acquaintance. Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Eliza Bennet, Darcy said. Miss Bingley, I would ask you to refrain from your usual manner of disparaging Miss Bennet while you are a guest in my home. Why, Mr. Darcy, whatever do you mean? You cannot be unaware that you have a habit of deriding Miss Bennet and her family at every turn. This evening is no different. It is all in good humour, I assure you. Come now, there is nothing but meanness intended in the manner of which you have spoken about the lady in the past. She is now a guest in my home. As such, I shall not abide your thinly disguised insults and other manners of derision shown towards her. I demand that you cease from this point on. Should you fail to heed my admonishment, I shall have my butler escort you to the door. You wouldn't dare! Do not tempt me. Since when did you become so protective of Eliza Bennet? Lest you forget, the young woman can give just as well as she gets. Or do you fail to recall her insolence when we were all together in Hertfordshire? We are no longer in Hertfordshire, and you are no longer in your brother's home. I will not have a guest in my home treated with such disdain. Well, I never thought I would witness the day when you would so casually dismiss me in preference for a near-perfect stranger. In case it has escaped your notice, Eliz, Miss Bennet and I are hardly strangers. In fact, it was not long after I met her that I began to consider her one of the most significant people of all my acquaintances. You would be wise to remember that. So, that is how it is. Eliza Bennet has used her country wiles and allurements to make you forget the unspoken bond the two of us once shared. Am I expected simply to give up without a fight? What on earth are you talking about? Darcy held up his hand. On second thought, forget I asked. I must return to my other guests. Should you wish to remain a guest in my home as well, do not forget this conversation. With that said, Darcy quit the room, leaving a very perturbed Miss Bingley to sulk. Caroline Bingley would be Caroline Bingley, however. Picking up the closest thing in her reach, a delicate porcelain figurine, she sent it crashing into the fireplace. Her ire increased with every review of her talk with Mr. Darcy. How it angered her that he would side with that little country, nobody who could mean nothing at all to any of them. This notion begged the question in Caroline's mind. What is Miss Eliza doing here at Darcy House in the first place and during Christmas of all times? She drifted over to the fireplace. I am severely surprised she's not in Hertfordshire, with that dreadful family of hers. I would have expected her sister Jane to be the one in town doing everything she can to throw herself in my brother's path. Caroline then recalled the letter she wrote to Jane explaining that her brother and Miss Georgiana Darcy were destined for each other. Mr. Darcy is impatient to see his sister, and to confess the truth, we are scarcely less eager to meet her again. I really do not think Georgiana Darcy has her equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments. And the affection she inspires in Louisa and myself is heightened into something still more interesting, from the hope we dare entertain of her being hereafter our sister. I do not know whether I ever before mentioned to you my feelings on this subject, but I will not leave the country without confiding them, and I trust you will not esteem them unreasonable. My brother admires her greatly already. He will have frequent opportunity now of seeing her on the most intimate footing. Her relations all wish the connection as much as his own, and a sister's partiality is not misleading me, I think, when I call Charles most capable of engaging any woman's heart. With all these circumstances to favour an attachment and nothing to prevent it, am I wrong, my dearest Jane, in indulging the hope of an event which will secure the happiness of so many? A troubling thought then occurred to her. Is that the purpose of that little chit Eliza Bennet's being in town? Does she mean to press her sister's case to my brother? Is that why she has thrown herself in Mr. Darcy's path, hoping to influence my brother? She shook her head. Those Bennets, they never give up. However, wishing to retain the right of being a guest in his home, Caroline did not mean to do or say anything that was opposed to Mr. Darcy's edict. If being nice to Miss Eliza Bennet is what he wants, I think I shall launch a full assault in that endeavour this evening. Indeed, I shall do everything in my power to kill that little upstart with civility and kindness. Darcy had been taken aback a bit by the sound of a crashing object, but not so concerned to return and see which of his possessions had met with the lady's wrath. He had more urgent matters to attend. For the first time he had openly confessed his great admiration for Elizabeth to another. Is there any wonder I feel this way? She is charming and witty. I have never known another whose company I desire as much as I desire hers. Darcy was given to consider that there were other attributes that he admired in Miss Elizabeth Bennet that had nothing to do with charm and wit, but more to do with bravery and strength of her own convictions. I must endeavour to remind her of the reason she is where she is today. It is not because of some weakness of character on her part that she ought to regret. She is where she is because of her willingness to stand up to others who would impose their will upon her, and expect her to do their bidding with little to anticipate in return other than a lifetime of misery, unhappiness, and remorse. When Darcy arrived in the drawing-room, he saw his guests were seated and listening to Mrs. Hurst exhibit on the pianoforte. He sat in an empty chair beside his sister. "Where is Miss Bennet?" he asked when he could. "She quit the room earlier. I suspect she's not suffering this time away from her family so well as she had supposed she might." "Did she tell you this?" "Not in so many words, but all the signs are there. One just needs to know how to look." Darcy placed his hand on his sister's. "When did you become so adept in the study of human nature?" "You give me too much credit, brother." "How so?" "Pray, how would you feel finding yourself away from your family at Christmas for the first time ever?" He reached for his sister's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I shall find her." Not long after that, Darcy and Elizabeth stood across from each other in the library. "I fear I am not the most gracious guest this evening, sir," Elizabeth said. "You need not apologise for wishing to have some time to yourself away from the others." She shrugged. "It's ironic that I feel so alone, and yet I am surrounded by all these people." Indeed, in addition to the Bingleys, Darcy had invited quite a few other friends and acquaintances to his home that evening, including his cousins Colonel Fitzwilliam and the Colonel's older brother, the Viscount Lord Robert Fitzwilliam. Some of those gathered Elizabeth liked, some she did not. None of that mattered, for none of them were her family. Elizabeth said, "I think I realised how much I miss my family most when Mrs. Hurst started to play. It reminded me of my sister Mary. What if you could return to your father's home this very evening? Picture yourself begging his forgiveness, throwing yourself at his mercy in the hope that he welcomes your return. Your father loves you. I am certain he will welcome your return to the family fold in under a heartbeat. It would be as though nothing had ever changed. But is that what you really want? Will that make you happy, or will all those things that led you to leave your home in the first place cause you to want to leave again? I know it is frightening to have a sense of being all alone in the world without a family support to shield you, but sometimes one must be willing to risk it all to find the happiness he or she seeks. What do you know about any of this, Mr. Darcy? When have you ever faced anything remotely akin to what I am suffering? I cannot say that I comprehend exactly what you are feeling, but imagine this if you will. Imagine losing a beloved mother as a child soon after she gave birth to an only sibling. Imagine coming to grips with such a loss and relying on all your faith and trust in knowing that you still have one parent, a most beloved father. Imagine losing him too. You feel all alone in the world, and your parents are still alive, both of them who, I am sure, would welcome you back. Imagine not having parents at all. Although I am 27, one never truly recovers from the loss of one's parents at any age. There is nothing I would not do to have another chance to talk with my mother, to enjoy another walk with her. How I would love to speak with my father again, to ride out with him and overlook Pemberley. I am sorry to be the means of such painful memories, sir. Do not be. Inevitably, one is bound to recall such times, especially at Christmas." Elizabeth smiled a little and then drifted to a picture of a countryside on the opposite wall. "Let us return to my question," Darcy said, approaching her from behind. "If you were at home, what would you be doing now?" She turned and regarded him intently. "Sir, I know you mean to help. I simply do not feel quite up to pretending." "Pray, follow my lead. Pretend I am Mr. Bennet." Elizabeth looked at her gentleman companion in wonder. She said nothing, which encouraged him to continue. Clearing his throat, Darcy said, "You must consider this matter strictly from a father's perspective, my child. One would be forced to concede that a marriage between the heir to his estate and one of his daughters is practical and in everyone's best interest." Elizabeth's face covered with dismay. She thought Mr. Darcy understood her stance and he was on her side. How dare he make light of my dilemma? Disappointed, she meant to turn away from him, but he would not allow it. Halting her, he continued, "However, you're the last person in the world who ought to be subjected to such a scheme. I know you well enough to know you would be subjected to misery of the acutest kind in an alliance in which you do not respect your husband. I should never have prevailed on you to do such a thing. I am afraid you do not know my father so well if you suppose he will cede his stance so easily as that." The thought crossed her mind once again that she did not know her father so well as she thought either. "Miss Elizabeth, I know you are lonely and missing your family. Would that I could take your mind off that." "I honestly believe you would, sir." "Indeed." Taking her by the hand and cradling it intimately inside both of his own, Darcy said, "I have an idea. Let us return to the rest of the party with the assurance that you are not alone in a room full of strangers. Let me be your family. For the remainder of this evening, I will not leave your side." Chapter 21. Wish to hide. Elizabeth, upon returning, suffered spirits more aptly suited to the occasion. When called on to have her turn at the pianoforte, she did so with alacrity, with Mr. Darcy by her side, turning the pages, an honour he had not bestowed on any of the other ladies that evening, not his sister, Miss Georgiana Darcy, and not Bingley's sisters either. Speaking of Bingley's sisters, Elizabeth could hardly comprehend the change in the attitude of the younger of the two ladies' manner, Miss Caroline Bingley. The earlier part of the evening had begun with snide remarks on that young lady's part about the Bennet family's misfortunes following the fire that destroyed their home. Miss Bingley inquired on the well-being of Elizabeth's London relations, whose acquaintance she had not yet had the pleasure of making. She asked questions about her sister's prospects, even going so far as to bring up the continuing presence of Mr. William Collins in Hertfordshire. The latter part of the evening was marked by praise of Elizabeth's gown, especially noting that it was not one she'd seen Elizabeth wearing when they were in Hertfordshire, in response to which Elizabeth replied, "Indeed, you will rarely if ever see me wearing anything I wore in Hertfordshire. Lest you forget, most of my possessions were destroyed by the fire." Miss Bingley's responded in the usual manner and attempted to recover with praise in another quarter. "I do hope you can be prevailed on to exhibit once again. I cannot decide which of the two of you I admire most, you or your lovely sister. I believe her name is Mary. Anyone who has had the privilege of hearing the two of you exhibit will no doubt find themselves in the same situation. No doubt my sister Mary would be delighted to know how much you admire her skills, Miss Bingley." "Indeed," cried Miss Bingley. Speaking to anyone who would listen, she said, "The Bennet daughters are not only proclaimed as being the loveliest ladies in all Hertfordshire, they are also among the most accomplished." Mr. Bingley said, "I do not know that I have ever heard of a woman who is not said to be accomplished." This was sufficient to divert his sister's attentions, which pleased Elizabeth immensely. Quitting that lady's company was essential if Elizabeth was to enjoy what was left of the evening. Later, when the guests were gone, and Georgiana had retired for the night, Elizabeth and Darcy were once again all alone. Elizabeth had been so taken aback by Miss Bingley's abundance of approbation that she felt compelled to discuss it with the gentleman. "I confess that I admonish Miss Bingley that she had better be on her best behaviour toward you this evening. Mr. Darcy, you really do think I need protection, don't you? I appreciate that this is not an ideal time for you, and I did not want to see matters made worse by Miss Bingley. I have no doubt that you can give as good as you get when it comes to that lady. Indeed, it is she who needs protection from you when it comes to both wit and charm. But even you cannot argue that an amiable Miss Bingley is far preferable to an aggrieved Miss Bingley. I am quite certain I do not prefer Miss Bingley in any shape or form, sir. Now hate me if you dare for my frankness. Hate you? I think not. In fact, after this evening I must confess to admiring you even more. You never cease to amaze me. You admire me, Mr. Darcy? Surely you know how much I do. It is not something I wish to hide." Elizabeth suffered feelings akin to those she felt whenever Mr. Darcy looked at her, the way he was looking at her at that moment, and spoke to her as he was speaking to her. His words spoken earlier that evening when they were alone, much the same as they were at present echoed in her mind. "Let me be your family." Not wanting to read too much into his kindness, a part of her could not help asking the question, "Does Mr. Darcy have the faintest idea of what he does to me?" Chapter 22. Fondest Wish Unfold. 2 days later, Elizabeth awakened with but one thought in mind. I have spent my first Christmas away from my family, and I did so without completely falling apart. She knew in large part she had Mr. Darcy and his sister to thank for that. The knowledge that their time together was quickly drawing to a close did not escape her. I confess I shall miss the two of them immensely, especially— A light rap on the door interrupted her musings. Georgiana poked her head inside. Elizabeth, she spoke softly, the two having mutually agreed they should address each other by their given names. Elizabeth reached out her hand, encouraging her friend to come inside. This is a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you? Georgiana quickly crossed the floor and climbed on Elizabeth's bed. I'm afraid I'm in need of a great favour, and you are the only person in the world whom I can turn to. What of your brother? I know there is nothing he would not do for you. The favour involves my brother. You see, he is intent on my marrying a young man whom I do not love. Elizabeth at first could hardly believe what she was hearing. Upon second thought, she asked herself why not. How many times had the gentleman advocated, even in jest, the merits of arranged marriage? If the rumours were to be believed, even he had committed to such an alliance with his cousin Miss Anderberg. Elizabeth, not wanting to speak prematurely, said nothing, which the younger woman took as sufficient encouragement to continue. I have long suspected that my brother had taken it upon himself to decide whom I shall marry. Last evening he confirmed it. Who is the gentleman? Elizabeth cried with energy. Oh, Elizabeth! It is Mr. Bingley. The younger woman stood and began pacing the floor. Please do not mistake me. You see, I like Mr. Bingley very much. However, my feelings for him are more akin to the affection between a brother and sister. Mr. Bingley is so easily influenced by my brother that he might very well propose, and I am so reluctant to disappoint my brother that I fear Mr. Bingley and I might very well find ourselves married, thus subjecting both of us to despair and rendering neither of us truly capable of respecting ourselves. What would happen when or if either us should one day meet the person whom we were truly meant to be with? Would we then become that manner of society couple who find comfort outside the confines of marriage? Oh, Elizabeth, that is the last thing I want for either of us. Please, will you speak with my brother? Elizabeth fought to keep her mouth from falling open. What Miss Bingley wrote in her letter to Jane had been true. But how can that be? Elizabeth wondered. Mr. Bingley was in love with her sister Jane. He had courted her for weeks. Elizabeth then recalled Mr. Darcy's assessment of his friend when they were in Hertfordshire, and her telling response. He is not the most reliable man in England. Now tell me, why on earth would you wish for such a man for your sister? Are you saying that my sister is too good for the likes of your friend? What I'm saying is this is not the first time I've known my friend to fall in love with a fair, angelic creature without a moment's delay, only to put her completely out of his mind within a week of their separation. I posit this instance is no different from the rest. Why on earth would he wish for such a man for his own sister? His sister, a young heiress whose prospects are limitless, Elizabeth wondered, recalling herself to the situation at hand. Georgiana, I do not know what to say. Say you will help prevent this travesty from unfolding. What can I do? You must speak with my brother. Tell him that he is wrong to suppose that it is up to him whom I marry. That decision rests with my future husband and me. Her brow crumpled. She bit her lower lip. Why me? Elizabeth asked. If not you, then to whom shall I appeal? It cannot be my cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam, for I do not dare share such sentiments with him. He and my brother will likely be in complete harmony with each other. Besides, I know enough about my brother to realize how much he esteems you. If anyone can make him relent, it is you. Later that same day, Elizabeth sought a private audience with Mr. Darcy. At length she pleaded Georgiana's case. Concluding her speech, she said, Surely you see that in principle, your expectations for your sister are not so much different from my father's expectations for me. What is that supposed to mean? I only have my sister's best interest at heart. Your situations have nothing in common. Do they not, sir? I'm sure I do not know what your intentions are, other than your wish to see your sister well settled. I also know the importance of a young woman choosing her own path in life, especially when she can. In fact, it is one of the things I suspect you like best about me. How can you not but admire the same qualities in your sister? I trust you are not advocating on Georgiana's behalf in the hope of increasing your own sister's prospects. His words took her aback. She did not know whether to be offended or a little bit ashamed, for, truth be told, she had not given up entirely on the hope that Jane and Bingley might one day be reunited. During her time in company with Georgiana and Bingley, Elizabeth had detected no symptom of affection beyond the sentiments the young lady ascribed. The gentleman had been far more attentive to Jane when they were in Hertfordshire. As for Jane's feelings, Elizabeth was forced to admit to being rather less certain. Jane never mentioned the gentleman in any of her letters. In fact, Jane's letters were so sparse, they hardly included anything at all other than threadbare observations. His own master for years and 7 years, the senior of the young woman sitting before him, pleading his younger sister's case that she should be allowed to choose her own future husband, and using his own words of admiration and esteem in fashioning her argument was a humbling experience indeed. Darcy was now in even greater danger from this young woman than ever before. This woman whose situation in life was so decidedly beneath his own. This woman whom a man in his position ought never to be entertaining ideas of knowing as his wife. At 27, finally he had met the woman whom, were it not for her situation in life, he would be tempted to go down on his knees and beg to accept his hand. Even with things being as they were time and again, he had admitted to himself that he was in her power. He would do anything in the world for her if she would but ask. But not this. Elizabeth had no knowledge of the entire story. Ever since he first made Bingley's acquaintance, he supposed he was an ideal match for Georgiana. Now, when his purpose in seeing his fondest wish unfold was drawing nearer, he was not about to be dissuaded, not even by Elizabeth. He did not fail to notice how pensive his companion had become. Sensing that he might have given Elizabeth offence by questioning her motives, gave Darcy pause. He knew her too well to accuse her of being disingenuous. "Pray forgive me," he said. "I realise how close you and my sister have become. I know you only have her best interests at heart as well." "Will you not even consider what I have asked, Mr. Darcy? What would be the point? My mind is made up. Sir, I would never presume to impose my will on another, but in such case as this I have no choice. Georgiana does not love Mr. Bingley, which is not to say that she cannot change her mind. But should that not be her decision, say you will think about it." Darcy was more conflicted over Elizabeth's plea than he dared confess, even to himself. Annoyed that his sense of control was melting away, he said, "I have heard what you have to say on this matter, Miss Elizabeth. Now pardon me, for I am expected at my solicitor's office. I should have arrived there a quarter of an hour ago." Thinking he might be more amiable to continuing this conversation later that day, Darcy abruptly quit the room. How could he know Elizabeth would not be there upon his return? Chapter 23. Attempt to Conceal. Elizabeth sat in the window seat of her bedroom at the gardener's home, staring absent-mindedly at the people and carriages passing by on the street below. Not for the first time, she questioned what she was about. In all her life she had always been so self-assured. She now felt lost, drifting from place to place, a perpetual guest beholden to friends and relations. At times like this, she wondered if she should have heeded her father's decree. At least there would have been the certainty of her own establishment, a place to call her own. Some weeks had passed since her discussion with Mr. Darcy on Georgiana's behalf. Mere days after she returned to Cheapside, she received a letter from Georgiana, with news that she and her brother were travelling to Pemberley. To Georgiana's dismay, the decision was made so suddenly that she did not have time to call on Elizabeth personally. She made no mention of whether her brother had heeded Elizabeth's advice. It is just as well, Elizabeth considered. Placing her hand on the window, memories of the time spent alone with Mr. Darcy came to mind. When the two of them were together at Christmas, they had enjoyed each other's company with the ease of long-time acquaintances. Indeed, their time together at his townhouse was better than that, for she had seen a side of him he dared not display in Hertfordshire. She always knew he was an honourable man. Any misgivings she once entertained about him, owing to his initial insult that she was not handsome enough to tempt him, were immediately dismissed when he risked his own life to save her sister Lydia. Time spent alone with him taught her things about herself that she never even knew. He was not immune to her, but neither was she to him. Were it not for the vast differences in their circumstances, she might have been in grave danger from the gentleman. No, I must not allow myself to think of what might have been. I must content myself with the knowledge that between Mr. Darcy and me there is some esteem and even admiration, and that is all there will ever be. On the other hand, she recalled how displeased he had been by her attempt to interfere in his guardianship of his sister. The two of them had not laid eyes on each other since. Surely he might have called on me. He and his sister, had he truly wished it. He is just the sort of gentleman who arranges his business just as he pleases. Have I lost his good opinion forever? Elizabeth was determined she would not dwell on Mr. Darcy a second longer, for she had greater worries at the moment. She had learned from her friend Charlotte that there was to be a wedding in Hertfordshire. Making matters worse was learning the extent to which her own family had gone to conceal the news from her. Indeed, Charlotte wrote to inform Elizabeth that her dearest sister Jane had received an offer of marriage from Mr. William Collins, and Jane had accepted. Did my family suppose I might have attempted to change Jane's mind? Is that the reason none of them thought to inform me? Elizabeth asked herself upon each review of her friend's letter. She could not say what she might have done. She would have been lying had she denied that not learning the news directly from her sister hurt her more than a little. True, Jane's letters of late had been extraordinarily brief. Elizabeth liked to attribute the brevity of her sister's missives to her belief that Jane was nursing a wounded heart. She wondered if she had her father to thank for Jane's attempt to conceal the knowledge of her ill-fated nuptials. Persuading herself that was indeed where the actual fault belonged, she now had even more reason to be disappointed in him. Elizabeth sighed. Charlotte's letter had arrived some time ago. Jane's wedding date had come and gone. Her dearest sister was married to the last man in the world she ought to have married, and there was nothing to do but accept it. Chapter 24. Semblance of Pleasure. Mrs. Jane Collins née Bennet. As disturbing as her sister's new appellation was to her ears, Elizabeth could not help repeating it. Mrs. Jane Collins née Bennet. Elizabeth never supposed that in turning down Mr. Collins's offer of marriage, she had been the means of her own sister's being married to the man. She wrongly assumed the odious man, having been rejected by one Bennet daughter, would be too proud to offer for another. No doubt Papa would have done everything in his power to prevent such an inconvenient outcome. Unlike Elizabeth, it was not in Jane's nature to disappoint anyone, and especially not one of her parents. Mr. Collins had come to Hertfordshire with the intention of choosing a wife from among his fair cousins, and that is indeed what he had done. If Jane were unhappy with her choice, she did not intend for anyone to know. Of that Elizabeth was certain. Jane was the type who rarely showed her true feelings to anyone, unlike Elizabeth, who often wore her feelings, her emotions, her heartbreak, her disappointment, her joy and her pain on her sleeves. Still, something was missing in Jane's letter, the one she had written once she was settled in Hunsford, that gave Elizabeth to suspect that her sister was more resigned than not. Jane's last letter with an invitation for Elizabeth to visit her in Hunsford, and Elizabeth's subsequent conversation with her aunt, replayed in Elizabeth's mind, for she had been debating the idea of making her own way in life for some time, be it as a governess or a companion for an older woman. She had all but decided that the latter was just the thing for her. "You need not make a decision right away," Mrs. Gardiner had urged Elizabeth. "I say, accept Jane's invitation for a visit to her new home, and return to London in the summer. Then we should commence a tour of the north that your uncle has been planning for some time. Would that not be fun?" "Dearest aunt, I had much better remain here to be of service to you. That's the least I can do in repayment for your giving me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go." "Nonsense, my dear. I don't want you to pause your life out of some misguided notion of obligation. You did not leave your father's home to be a governess for my children, or anyone else's children for that matter. You are meant for greater things. You should go to see Jane. What's more, you should endeavour to see other places and things, and experience life to its fullest." With her spirits in a state of bewilderment, all Elizabeth's thoughts took another course as her carriage rounded a bend and the parsonage, surrounded by a garden sloping to the road, came into view. The carriage stopped at a small gate which led to a short gravel walk to the house. Mr. Collins and Jane appeared at the door. In no time at all, Jane and Elizabeth were in each other's arms, rejoicing at the sight of each other. Such a warm and affectionate greeting was just as it ought to be between the sisters, and rendered the infrequency of their correspondence over the past weeks almost inconsequential. The two eldest Bennet daughters were together again. Nothing else mattered. Obliged to put forth some semblance of pleasure in being reunited with Mr. Collins, Elizabeth surrendered her sister's embrace, and offered her brother-in-law a slight curtsy. She instantly saw that the ridiculous man's manners were not altered by his marriage. His formal civility was just what it had always been. Can my dearest sister Jane truly be happy with such a man? Elizabeth wondered not for the first time that day. Later, the sisters were alone in the parlour. "Thank you for coming to see me, Lizzie," said Jane, handing her sister a cup of tea. "I am happy to be here, dearest Jane. It has been far too long since you and I have seen each other." "Yes. I am sorry that my husband and I were unable to wait until you returned from your walk in the park before taking our leave of Aunt Gardiner's home. He was in haste to return to his duties here in Hunsford after being away for so long." Indeed, as disappointed as Elizabeth had been at the time, upon her return to her aunt's house to learn that Jane and her new husband had come and gone during her absence, she could not be too upset to have missed the latter. Looking around and endeavouring only to be polite, Elizabeth asked, "Pray, where is Mr. Collins? I'm rather surprised he did not accompany us into the house to have tea." "Wherever he is, I hope he stays for a good long time," she silently added. "Lizzie, now surely there is no need for such formality. I am certain it will not be too much of a burden for you to refer to my husband in more familial terms. What then shall I call him? Sycophantic, toady, disgusting," Elizabeth pondered. "Pray forgive me, Jane. I will try to remember." Elizabeth had arrived with every expectation of witnessing signs of Jane's broken heart, the aftermath their father's choice had rendered upon her dearest sister. She saw nothing in Jane's face that gave her to suspect that her sister in any way regretted that she was married to the odious Mr. Collins. "Jane, I do not ever suppose I shall forgive Papa for forcing you into an alliance such as this merely for his own purposes. Not that my lack of forgiveness would have any bearing on my father," she silently surmised, remembering that he along with her mother had vowed never to see her again if she did not marry the odious Mr. Collins herself. "Lizzie, I realise that you and my father have suffered an unfortunate parting of the ways because of his strong stance, but I do wish you would not go so far as to say that you shall never forgive him. It is not as though I did not have the choice of saying no. I said yes, and do you know why? I suppose it is because, unlike me, you are utterly unselfish, and you seek to please others despite your own sentiments. In this case, I would say I was very selfish. I cannot bear the thought that our family would be destroyed not only by the devastating fire, but also by family members turning their backs on family members. Oh, Lizzie, can you not see? I acted as I did with the hope that all of us would be reunited." Chapter 25. Its Own Reward. Having left the ladies to their own devices, Collins reflected on how fortunate he was having married the best of the Bennet daughters. Indeed, Mrs. Collins is everything a proper wife ought to be. "My noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, said so herself upon meeting my lovely wife," he reminded himself. "I am overjoyed to have Elizabeth visit and stay as long as she desires. She will soon be wishing she had not been so foolish in dismissing my affections, and then she'll be sorry for what she has done." Collins, were he to admit it to himself, would concede his motives in marrying Jane were entirely selfish. Longbourn was his birthright. True, the living he had in Hunsford was such that any woman ought to have been proud to marry him, but he could not have expected to capture the fancy of any woman as lovely as Miss Jane Bennet if he did not have his inheritance to boast of. He told Elizabeth that and more upon seizing an opportunity to speak with her alone the next day. "You must not make yourself unhappy that it is your sister who is mistress of all this, considering that it could have been you. Indeed, I would be entirely remiss, I am sure, were I to allow you to go on lamenting your ill-advised decision a moment longer than is necessary. You see, I had singled your elder sister out as the object of my affections the moment I first laid eyes on her, and it was only at your mother's insistence that I was forced to consider you in the present Mrs. Collins's stead. As you well know, your mother truly supposed the young man from town, Mr. Bingley I believe it was, had every intention of making your eldest sister a proposal of marriage. If it helps you to know, I would have been gravely displeased had you and I married instead, only to learn that a marriage between your sister and the young man from town would never unfold. It is true, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Not wanting to mislead her cousin into believing the two of them were actually engaged in mutual intercourse, Elizabeth said nothing. She turned the page of her book. Still, she could barely concentrate on her reading. Such nonsense as that which her cousin was wont to espouse was not always so easily ignored. Collins continued, "It is often said that patience is its own reward. Never have truer words been spoken, particularly in such case as this. It would not do." Pretend as she might to ignore him, Elizabeth could not help but ponder Mr. Collins's outlandish remarks. Were the man's assertions meant to console her or insult her? Whatever were his true intentions, all Elizabeth wanted to do at that point was congratulate herself. She had escaped a lifetime of misery. No, she could never regret what she had done. That was the sensible part of her thinking and feeling that way. The sentimental part of her could not help feeling sorry for her sister's plight. But if Jane did not intend to be miserable, then why on earth would Elizabeth? With that in mind, Elizabeth shut her book, unceremoniously pardoned herself, and set out for a solitary ramble. When she was alone outside and away from the parsonage house, she could truly appreciate the beautiful surroundings. She walked in the direction of Rosings Park and wondered when, if ever, she would see the place from the inside. Grand houses in general did not impress her per se, but this was not just another fine house. This was the home of Mr. Darcy's noble aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She so wanted to meet the grand lady, and looked to see in her a possible resemblance to Mr. Darcy, and perhaps his sister Georgiana as well. Elizabeth smiled a little at the thought of how deeply her cousin esteemed the great lady, and wondered how her ladyship would feel were she to learn that Elizabeth was intimately acquainted with her niece and nephew. Chapter 26. Most Ardently. Having spent the past week in Matlock visiting her Fitzwilliam relations, Georgiana was anxious to see her brother upon her return to Pemberley. Ever since their return to Derbyshire in late December, he had been unusually reclusive, spending long hours alone in his study attending to estate business and the like. Standing just outside the slightly open door of his study, the sound of his voice halted her steps. "I have struggled in vain." Taken aback, Georgiana placed her hand on her chest. "Mrs. Reynolds informed me that my brother was alone. Was she mistaken?" "No," she heard him say. "In vain I have struggled. It will not do." "Oh, I should not be here," she admonished herself in silence. "But I must know with whom my brother is speaking." "You must allow me." "No. I love you most ardently, despite the inferiority of your birth in comparison to my own." Georgiana's astonishment was beyond expression. Against her better nature she drew closer to the door. To whom can my brother possibly be speaking in such an uncivil manner? She listened in utter dismay as he recounted the reasons that had prevented him from theretofore forming any serious designs on his companion. Her family's lack of propriety, their want of connections and fortune. At length he said, "All these things I have considered, and yet I am willing to toss aside my better judgment and ask you this." Here he cleared his throat. His voice softened. He said, "Miss Elizabeth, I love you most ardently. Please do me the honour of accepting my hand in marriage." "Miss Elizabeth!" Before she knew what she was about, Georgiana burst into the room. "Brother?" "Georgiana, my dear," Darcy responded, turning about to face her. I was unaware that you had returned from Matlock." She threw a quick glance about the room. Seeing that her brother was indeed alone, just as the housekeeper had informed her, she said, "Pray you will forgive me, but I could not help overhearing you. Are you in love with Miss Elizabeth Bennet? Do you mean to propose to her? Or is it your intention to lose her good opinion forever? Young lady, you know better than to listen to other people's private conversations." She looked about the room again for good measure. "I say it is very fortunate Miss Elizabeth is not here, else you most surely would have alienated her with such an outrageous speech." "What is that supposed to mean?" "Unless I'm mistaken, I overheard you profess that you have struggled in vain in your endeavour to repress your feelings for her." Darcy ran his fingers through his hair. "As I have. An alliance with Miss Elizabeth would be a degradation to our family, for a litany of reasons, not the least of which is owing to the inferiority of her birth. Yet I have weighed the advantages and disadvantages of such an alliance, and decided to offer my hand to her despite the inequities. Lest you did not overhear, I conceded that I love and admire her. Yes, most ardently. No doubt she will not be insensible to the compliment of your affection. However, the manner of such a proposal will hardly recommend your suit. You know as well as anyone that disguise of any sort is my abhorrence. I believe it would be entirely insincere were I to conceal my struggles from her, to flatter her into the belief of my being impelled by unqualified, unalloyed inclination. Miss Elizabeth ought to know that as a consequence of the strength of my attachment to her, I found it impossible to conquer despite all my endeavours. How her estrangement from that family of hers lessens my concerns over such an unequal alliance considerably. Indeed, I find myself rejoicing that she is no longer encumbered by such inferior connections, whose conditions are so decidedly beneath my own. Apart from them, our happiness is assured. I beg to differ, brother. Such sentiments as you espouse are best kept to yourself. Furthermore, if you suppose Elizabeth will be happy living a life that excludes her Hertfordshire relations, then you really do not know her at all. I am afraid, young lady, there are things about Miss Elizabeth's situation that you do not understand. I understand that she left her father's home as a matter of principle, that she did not wish to be subjected to a marriage of convenience, refused to sacrifice her own future happiness as a means of her family's salvation, but that does not mean she does not love them. It simply means that she loves herself as well. She knows herself well enough to discern that conceding one's own future happiness and well-being for the sake of another's is a recipe for misery of the acutest kind. Putting one's own best interest ahead of all else does not lessen the love of one's family. Elizabeth's family will always be part of her. If you truly love her and wish to spend the rest of your life with her, it is incumbent upon you to understand that. Were you privy to the actual nature of Miss Elizabeth's family, the many shades in each of their characters, you would realise how wrong you are. My sentiments are based on certain truths. Miss Elizabeth loves her sisters. Her elder sister, Miss Bennet, Mrs. Collins, means the world to her. As you know, having met all the Bennets in Hertfordshire, Elizabeth has 3 other sisters, Miss Mary, Miss Catherine, Miss Kitty, Georgiana corrected herself before continuing, and Miss Lydia. She has often spoken of all of them with such fondness, such longing. I know she misses each of them terribly. Darcy said nothing, which was sufficient encouragement for his sister to continue. It is not my intention to chastise you for sentiments you feel are honest and just. You are the best man I know. You've loved and protected me for so long as I remember, even when we were children. What if, heaven forbid, you had not arrived in Ramsgate in time to save me from running away with George? Would you have turned me away upon my eventual return to Pemberley? Would you have stopped loving me? George Wickham. Georgiana knew she was treading on dangerous ground merely mentioning that gentleman's name in her brother's presence. Although the 2 men had been reared together at Pemberley, and at one time were friends, they were now estranged for reasons she later found out were all of George's own doing. Her late father's godson, George, felt certain rights and privileges were owed to him. After the late Mr. Darcy's passing, the former attributed every hardship he encountered to his former friend. Georgiana, having nursed a tender regard for George since childhood, was completely unaware of just how bitter the gentleman had become over the years until her brother arrived in Ramsgate and made it clear that George would never receive a single shilling of her dowry of £30,000. His subsequent disappearance to parts unknown proved his sole purpose in following her to Ramsgate and proposing marriage was mercenary. What a mistake her brother had saved her from making. Saving him from making a mistake that might cost him Elizabeth's good opinion perhaps forever, in a way was Georgiana's way of thanking her brother for all he had done for her. Continuing her speech, she said, "I applaud your decision to offer your hand to Elizabeth. Having seen the 2 of you together in London, I believe Elizabeth and you have the means of making each other very happy, and although you do not need my blessing, you have it." Placing her hand on her brother's and giving it a gentle squeeze, Georgiana said, "Elizabeth is visiting her elder sister, Mrs. Collins. Go to her, but pray reconsider the manner of your proposal, and dwell not on the inherent disadvantages. Rather focus on the joy and felicity such a union will afford." Chapter 27. Deep in Slumber. Taking advantage of the unseasonably warm weather, Elizabeth shed her cloak and spread it out over a grassy spot just off the path. There she sat and commenced reading a romantic novel she had procured while in town. It being her second reading, she soon succumbed to the beaming sun's warmth. Reclining on her cloak with her face to the sky, she closed her eyes and allowed her thoughts of the most dashing gentleman she knew to consume her. Between romance-filled dreams of Mr. Darcy and horrific dreams of fire-ravishing Longbourn, she much preferred the former, which is the reason she purposely thought of him whenever she closed her eyes to sleep. Indeed, so convinced as she was that she might never see him again in view of their last time together in London, she allowed herself free rein to indulge in fantasies about what it must be like to give herself to this man completely, this handsome man, the memory of whom accompanied her wherever she went, the man who had been her friend and her protector, the man whom she imagined as her lover. Such sweet imaginings as that which encompassed her thoughts soon accompanied her deep in slumber. "Mr. Darcy, what are you doing here?" "Miss Elizabeth, I came to see you. I had to see you. I have tried in vain to deny how much I want you, and how much I long for you. Please, please, my darling Elizabeth, please tell me that I am not alone in my thirst, my desire, my aching longing to make you my woman, to make you my wife. I must confess to desiring you as well, Mr. Darcy. I want you. I need you. My heart aches for you. I ache for you." You ache for me, Miss Elizabeth." "I know it sounds wanton, but I cannot help it. I find myself wanting to do things with you that no decent young woman ought to confess, and thus I spend my every moment longing for your touch, wishing to know what these feelings I have for you are, and wanting nothing more than to give myself to you completely. I am here now. Tell me you will be my wife, and I will satisfy your every desire." Giving truth to his tender words of affection, the gentleman commenced demonstrating his own longing for her as violently as a young man deeply and profoundly in love could be expected to do. Eventually he pressed forth his plea, "Will you accept my hand in marriage?" If she suffered any reservations, this was not the time to speak of them. In the wake of her silence, he begged the question, "What is your answer?" "Yes." "You will marry me?" She nodded. "Make me yours." Elizabeth opened her eyes to find that she was all alone. This was but another dream, the most powerful one ever. It was almost as if it was real this time. The thought that she really ought to stop thinking and feeling this way revisited her, as it always did. There was a reason that she and Mr. Darcy had not seen each other for months. A very good reason. Such a connection between the two of them simply was not meant to be. Having lost all track of the time, Elizabeth quickly arose from her comfortable resting place. After trying as best as she could to brush away any lingering ground debris that attached itself to her cloak, she threw it on and set off on the lane leading to the parsonage house. She had not walked very far at all when she found herself face to face with none other than Mr. Darcy. Her heart slammed against her chest. She had given little thought to anything other than her intoxicating dream of what it must be like to really know this man. And now, there he stood. Did I conjure him up? After quickly greeting each other, albeit rather awkwardly, Elizabeth sought to explain her appearance to Mr. Darcy. She said, "I'm afraid I lost track of time completely. You see, I found a comfortable spot to read." Here she showed the gentleman her book. Still rather embarrassed, she hastily added, "I fell asleep." Before allowing him to respond, she said, "Sir, I thought you were in Derbyshire. What are you doing here?" "I came to see you. I had to see you." "My sister. Pray tell me Georgiana is in good health." "Yes, she is." "What I was about to say is my sister told me you were here visiting your sister." Relieved, she said, "I suppose you are here to visit your aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, at Rosings, and fate placed you on this very path." "Indeed, I am planning to visit my aunt, and I suppose it is fair to say fate put me on this path. You see, I was on my way to the parsonage house to call on you. Seeing you is my primary purpose in being here." He moved closer to her. "Miss Elizabeth, I have missed you. The time we spent together at Christmas, the manner of our separation in town, and the months I spent in Derbyshire have taught me one thing." Taking her hand in his, Darcy raised it to his lips. Kneeling on one knee, he gazed into her eyes. "You know how much I have long admired you. Indeed, I had not known you for a month before realizing just how much you have bewitched me, heart and soul. I love you most ardently. Please do me the honour of accepting my hand." "Mr. Darcy," Elizabeth cried, placing her free hand on her chest, "I hardly know what to say." "Say yes." I thought I'd never see you again. I thought you despised me for interfering in your relationship with your sister." His eyes filled with emotion. "I love you. Pray you will not keep me in suspense. Pray you will say yes." that she'd been so fortunate as to have earned so much of Mr. Darcy's affection, that he suffered sentiments toward her which rivaled her own feelings for him, brought tears to her eyes. She nodded. "Is that a yes?" "Yes, yes," Elizabeth exclaimed. "I shall be honoured to be your wife." Standing, Darcy picked Elizabeth up. Holding her high, he spun around in unbridled enthusiasm over her acceptance. The unfolding of such a happy occasion inevitably led to a violent outpouring of affections, as well as long repressed words of mutual adoration and desire, as passionately as might be expected of young lovers. Walking hand in hand, Darcy's joy could hardly be repressed. "Elizabeth," he said at length, "you have made me the happiest man in all of England. I want to shout it from the highest rooftop, although I must warn you that there are those in my family who will not welcome our happy news. Not that it will have any effect on me, mind you. I am my own master, and I do not need anyone's blessing or approval." "Pray you are not speaking of your sister. On the contrary, Georgiana adores you. Indeed, I believe I'm quite indebted to her. She's very wise for someone her age." "No, it is not my sister. However, it is someone whose acquaintance you may have made, and if not, you're bound to make soon. My aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh." "Would your aunt's objection have to do with her belief that you and her daughter are engaged? Did Lady Catherine tell you that?" "No, she did not. I overheard the Bingley sisters discussing it when we were all in Hertfordshire. Do you mean to say that you have been suffering under the misconception that I was engaged to marry another for so long as we have known each other?" "In truth, I never knew quite what to think. I must confess that your eagerness to arrange an alliance for your sister did lend a bit of credence to the prospect." Thinking it best to refrain from speaking further on the subject, she said, "Perhaps that is a matter you would rather not speak on at such a time as this." "Elizabeth, pray you do not mind me addressing you by your given name. I have wanted to do so for so very long." Taking her smile as consent, he said, "Pray you will feel free to discuss anything you wish to discuss with me from this moment on." Saying that, I confess that I was at first rather annoyed that you championed my sister's cause, but it was not very long afterward that I directed my ire to its rightful recipient, that being myself. I should never have presumed that my sister desired anything other than a love match, especially given my determination that I would never accept anything less. Does that mean what I hope it means? If you're hoping that I have abandoned the idea of an alliance between Bingley and Georgiana, then yes, I have. I told my sister as much before taking my leave of Pemberley. Oh, Georgiana must be very happy indeed. I can hardly wait to see her. Trust me when I say she's looking forward to seeing you as well. When shall you write and tell her our happy news? I shall make it a priority. However, there is someone who's closer to us in proximity, who ought to be informed even sooner." "Your aunt, Lady Catherine," Elizabeth said knowingly. "Indeed. My aunt, as well as your sister. Oh yes, Jane will be ecstatic. I should like very much to tell everyone this evening." "You may indeed have your wish, sir. You see, after much fretting on my cousin's part, he was overjoyed to receive an invitation for the Hunsford party to dine at Rosings this evening." Elizabeth silently reflected on all she had heard about the grand lady, who resided mere miles away from where she had been staying the past week or so. She laughed a little. "What are you thinking?" Darcy asked. "I'm merely pondering the irony of my situation, for I had initially anticipated this evening with a mixture of dread and wonder over the prospect of meeting your aunt and your cousin. Now I find myself eagerly awaiting the pleasure of being presented to her ladyship as her future niece." Chapter 28. Disturbing News. "Darcy, this is a pleasant surprise. Indeed, I did not expect to receive you until Easter. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. My Anne and I are always delighted to have you visitors at Rosings. Of course, you know this to be true." Darcy threw a quick glance about the ornately decorated room in which he had spent time every year for the better part of his life. Nothing had changed. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice. I see that your cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam did not travel with you. Dare I hope this means what I think it ought to mean, that you have arrived ahead of schedule for the sole purpose of fulfilling the favourite wish of your mother, my dear late sister, Lady Anne, as well as my own." "On the contrary, Lady Catherine, my arriving here has nothing to do with satisfying your favourite wish. I have no intention of doing so, not now, not ever. My current circumstance renders such a prospect impossible." "Nonsense, nephew. What on earth is there about your current circumstance that might possibly prevent an alliance between Anne and you?" "You shall find out all there is to know in due time." Darcy stood in preparation to quit the room. "I believe the Hunsford party are expected for dinner. If you will pardon me, I should like to adjourn to my apartment for a fresh change of clothing. I eagerly await this evening's activity." "Just 1 minute," demanded Lady Catherine, rising from her chair. "How could you possibly know the Hunsford party are expected at Rosings when you only arrived yourself?" She drew closer to her nephew, who towered above her. "What is more," she continued, "why would any of those people being here interest you in the slightest? The fact of the matter is I'm very well acquainted with the Collinses." "This is not to be borne, nephew." "How can you possibly know the Collinses? Those people are so far beneath you in consequence as to be considered laughable. You will recall I visited Hertfordshire last year. I had the opportunity to be in company with your parson's new bride as well as her sister, Miss Bennet, for an extended period. Indeed, I know them very well. Now, if you will pardon me, Lady Catherine, I shall return in a few hours." Darcy had not been gone more than 15 minutes when Lady Catherine's butler, Mr. Harvey, entered the room. "Pardon me, your ladyship. I have had the misfortune of hearing some rather disturbing news below stairs. I feel it is absolutely incumbent on me to share it with you, lest you hear it from someone wholly unconnected to Rosings." "Pray do not keep me in suspense. What on earth is being said?" "It has to do with your nephew, Mr. Darcy, and a certain young lady who is a guest at the parsonage house." Listening to the butler recount the salacious details of what was being discussed among the servants, Lady Catherine suffered an unhealthy mixture of outrage and vexation. Outrage that anyone would dare engage in malicious gossip about her favourite nephew, and vexation that her nephew's own words mere moments ago lent truth to the unguarded whispers. Not wishing to believe a single word of the rumours bore credence, Lady Catherine did the only thing she could do once she had heard enough. Arising from her seat, she said, "Call for my carriage at once." Not bothering to wait, she proceeded to quit the room. "I shall ascertain the truth of the matter myself." Despite their agreement to keep their engagement a secret until later that evening when the Hunsford party were to dine at Rosings, Elizabeth could not possibly keep such happy news to herself. She could hardly wait until she and her sister were alone, apart from her ridiculous brother-in-law, who would no doubt cause a spectacle if he knew. Jane and Elizabeth were midway up the stairs when the sound of the doorbell drew their attention and caused them to halt in their steps. They returned to the parlour in time to see Mr. Collins kowtowing before the new arrival. "Lady Catherine," he said, bowing, "welcome to my humble abode. This is a great pleasure indeed, for I was given to believe I would not have the honour of being in your noble presence until this evening at Rosings." Ignoring the vicar, Lady Catherine spun around and observed Jane and Elizabeth enter the room. "Mrs. Collins," she said, "I suppose that young lady is your sister, Miss Elizabeth Bennet." "I am indeed, your ladyship," replied Elizabeth in her elder sister's stead. She curtsied. "It is an honour to make your acquaintance." Eyeing Elizabeth from head to toe, the grand lady harumphed. "You, young lady, can have no doubt as to the reason I am here." Mr. Collins said, "I am certain my cousin is as surprised as I am by the honour you have bestowed us." "Pray do not interrupt me, Mr. Collins. My business is not with you." Lifting her walking stick and pointing it in Elizabeth's direction, she said, "My business is with her." "That young woman knows precisely why I am here. Do you deny it?" "I beg your pardon, your ladyship. I have just met you. How can I possibly ascertain your motives based on an acquaintance of so short a duration as ours?" She glanced at her sister for a brief instant and detected Jane's astonishment. It could not be helped. Elizabeth's courage always rose in the wake of attempts to intimidate her. The woman standing before her, despite her royal lineage, was rude and uncivil. Elizabeth could not help wondering how many others among her future in-laws possessed such unamiable qualities. "I warn you, Miss Bennet, I am not one to be trifled with. I demand a private audience with you. Mr. Collins, Mrs. Collins, leave us." "Lizzie?" Jane responded, her eyes questioning. Her voice determined, Elizabeth said, "There can be nothing that you wish to say to me that cannot be said to everyone in this room." "Very well. I'd hoped to spare your family from learning of a most egregious scandal, but as I have neither the time nor the inclination to debate with you, I shall state my purpose in coming here, and then all of you shall know." Relying heavily on her walking stick, she hobbled closer to Elizabeth. "Rumours have been circulating about a scandalous liaison between my nephew Mr. Darcy and you, that the two of you were espied in a compromising position this very day." "Elizabeth," Mr. Collins shouted, "is that true?" Lady Catherine glared at the parson, effectively silencing his protest. "What do you have to say in your defence, Miss Bennet?" she demanded, focusing her wrath once again on the younger woman. "Were you in company with Mr. Darcy today?" "I do not know that how I spend my time is of any concern to you. As I said, you and I have just met. You ought to know this about me. I am not one to abide such unmitigated disrespect. When I ask a direct question, I demand a direct answer and nothing less. Do you understand me? As much as Elizabeth did not wish to be rude to her future relation, she had no choice. To yield so easily as Lady Catherine expected would not portend well for her future happiness one bit. Your ladyship, you may ask any question you choose. I shall reserve the right to choose whether I respond. I shall take your unwillingness to answer my question as confirmation that you have indeed been cavorting with my nephew. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Your family ought to be ashamed of you as well. My nephew is spoken for. He and my daughter, Anne, are intended for each other. From their cradles they were destined to be married. What say you now? Have you no decency, no consideration at all for my daughter's expectations? Having never met your daughter, I can rightfully say her expectations can have no bearing whatsoever on me. I will also say this. I wager I stand a greater chance of becoming the next Mrs. Darcy than your daughter can ever hope for. How dare you make such an outlandish assertion? How dare you be so presumptuous, so sanctimonious? Has my nephew foolishly made you an offer of marriage?" Before Elizabeth could fashion a response that did not lend suspicion to the truth, Mr. Darcy stormed into the room. Having learned of Lady Catherine's scheme from his valet, he was livid. Taking his place by Elizabeth's side, he said, "Lady Catherine, how dare you come here and demand answers to questions best directed to me? Gossip of the worst kind is raging out of control that has to do with you and this young woman. Who better than me to put a halt to it? If perchance this young woman has managed to use her feminine arts and allurements to make you, in a moment of lust-filled weakness, forget who you are and what you are about, then I mean to see an end to it before it is too late. You and Anne are engaged to be married. I do not mean to stand idly by while someone of inferior birth and circumstances usurps my daughter of all that has long been intended for her. Your means of intimidating Miss Bennet are entirely in vain, and to answer your question, yes, I have made her an offer of marriage, and I happily inform you that she said yes." Mr. Collins, who had appeared deeply distressed by all the unfolding events in his humble abode, collapsed to the floor. Panicked, Jane raced to her husband, as did Elizabeth. Hardly in the mood for such hysterical pretence, her ladyship commanded the gentleman to stand up. "You shall not escape your share of the blame for this travesty so easily as this," Lady Catherine exclaimed with energy. Collins recovered immediately. Accepting the aid of his dear wife, he settled in a nearby chair. Lady Catherine said, "I demand that you send that wanton young woman on her way." Jane said, "Pardon me, your ladyship. My sister shall always be welcome in my home." Ignoring Jane's protest, Lady Catherine spoke instead to her parson. "Were I you, I would advise Mrs. Collins to remember to whom she is speaking. That is, unless the generous living I have bestowed upon you is somehow unimportant. There is always another impoverished parson who would value my benevolence, if you take my meaning." Collins coloured. His lower lip trembling, he appeared in desperate want of a fitting reply. Mr. Darcy interceded. "I cannot tell you how you ought to conduct your own affairs. However, I will say this. Should you lift one finger in retaliation against either Mr. or Mrs. Collins, for actions wholly beyond their control, I will know how to act. You dare threaten me, nephew, me, your own family, your own blood? Miss Bennet is my family now, as are all of her relations. I shall not stand idly by and watch any of them being ill-used. As for the Collinses, lest you forget there is an advantageous living in Kympton that will no doubt suit perfectly well. If need be, they are welcome to come and live at Pemberley until such time as it becomes available." "Heaven and earth!" she cried. "Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?" Interrupting his aunt, Darcy continued, "As for you, Lady Catherine, all ties between us would be severed beyond repair. Why, I never thought I would see the day when you, the one nephew whom I have cherished beyond all others, would speak to me in such a callous manner. This is not to be borne." "There is one other thing I might add," said Darcy, holding up his hand. "Miss Bennet will remain here at the parsonage house with her sister as long as she wishes. Her being here may not be with your blessing, but it most surely will be without any further haranguing from you. Do I make myself clear? So this is how it is to be? This is your final resolve?" Crossing one arm over the other, Darcy said, "It is indeed." "Then I have heard all I need to hear," Lady Catherine declared as she prepared to quit the room. "I had come here hoping to clear my nephew's name," she began, speaking to no one in particular, "to save him from making a grave mistake that no doubt will lower his standing in the eyes of society and the world in general. I am most seriously displeased with all of you." In this manner Lady Catherine talked on, until she reached the door when, turning hastily round, she added, "I take no leave of any of you. You deserve no such attention. As for the invitation to dine at Rosings this evening, consider it cancelled." Chapter 29, Where the Heart Lives. After spending the better part of the evening before at the parsonage house with Elizabeth and the Collinses, Darcy arose early the next morning. He and Elizabeth planned to meet each other in the same spot as he had proposed to her. Their first walk together as future husband and wife was replete with all the mutual displays of admiration and affection of two lovers who had recently found their way to each other. At length, some conversation must be had, and Elizabeth took it upon herself to make a start by insisting Mr. Darcy account for having fallen in love with her. "I can hardly account for the hour or the spot or the look or the words which laid the foundation for my love for you," he began, confessing further that he was in the middle before he knew it had begun. "But surely you must have some indication. I suspect you could not have admired me when we were together in Hertfordshire. I believe I admired you even then. I admired your wit and your charm, the liveliness of your mind, as well as the courage you showed throughout your family's darkest hour, and your willingness to stand up for your own convictions. I rather supposed you merely learned to tolerate me, sir, as well as my family. No doubt you despise my mother for misconstruing your bravery in saving my sister. You will recall my telling you that I did not blame you for your mother's behaviour. Yet you have willingly placed yourself in the exact position she had hoped for, her future son-in-law. I cannot imagine finding yourself an accomplice in her scheme was a decision made without a great deal of introspection. Truth be told, there were any number of considerations I struggled to overcome. I must credit my sister for helping me see what is really important. Yes, this is not the first time you have alluded to your sister in that respect. Pray, is there anything I ought to know?" "Indeed, there is. You ought to know, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, that you are the most important person in the world to me, and there is nothing I will not do for you." Darcy placed his hand on her chin and lifted her face to gaze into her eyes. "That said, I must insist you account for your own feelings, my love. It is only fair." Her spirits rising to playfulness, Elizabeth said, "Well, sir, much like you, I hardly knew when it began as well. I believe I first made a start upon seeing your magnificent townhouse. I beseech you to be serious." "If you insist," she said, fingering his lapels. "In truth, I must indeed place it to my time at your townhouse, at Christmas, when you said, 'Let me be your family.' How odd it seemed to me that I did indeed feel as though you were my family. Indeed, though I did not fully comprehend my sentiments at the time, while spending time with Georgiana and you at your townhouse, I always had a sense that I was where I belonged, as though I were home." Leaning his forehead against hers, he said, "It warms my heart and soul to hear you say that, my love. I have always been given to believe that home is where the heart lives." He then pressed his lips against hers. At length he said, "As you have long held a special place in my heart, you have long had a home with me." The decision of how to go about informing Elizabeth's relations had yet to be made, and given that she was not yet 21, the matter of whether to seek Mr. Bennet's blessings or head to Gretna Green needed a swift resolution. Having broached the subject upon resuming their walk, Darcy asked, "How shall we proceed?" He brushed his hand along her chin. "Shall I travel to Hertfordshire to speak with your father, or shall we set off for Scotland?" I have given this matter a great deal of thought as well as spoken with my sister Jane. Despite the gulf between my papa and me, I believe it will be best to elect the former. Perhaps it will be the means of a reconciliation." Darcy smiled. "I was hoping you would feel that way. Family's important." "What of your family, sir? Has Lady Catherine come to terms with our engagement? No one has arrived thus far demanding my family and I vacate the premises. Shall I take that as a good sign?" "I would say your family has nothing to concern themselves with in that regard. As much as my aunt likes to have her own way, she has no power over me. Besides, you heard her say I am her favourite nephew. She would not wish to earn my disapprobation. I am one of the few members of my family who tolerates her." Elizabeth's spirits rising to playfulness, she said, "Then it is quite decided, is it not?" "What's decided?" "You and I shall be married. We shall be the happiest couple in all of England, and there is nothing anyone can do or say to change things." Taking her into his arms, Darcy leaned forward and spoke softly in Elizabeth's ear. "Here's to the promise of happily ever after." Epilogue. When the news of the engagement between Darcy and Elizabeth reached Hertfordshire, both Mrs. Bennet and her youngest daughter complained excessively of being ill-used by Lizzie for stealing Lydia's bow. Having been persuaded that her dashing hero, Mr. Darcy, was deeply in love with her, young Lydia had effectively sworn off redcoats. Then came news of the imminent arrival of the militia in Meryton. Oh, the power the prospect of officers stretching as far as the eyes could see had on the revival of the young girl's disappointed hopes. When Mrs. Bennet really thought about it, she too could not hold on to her disappointment on behalf of her youngest daughter. A future son-in-law was a future son-in-law after all. There was no reason she could not be just as happy with Mr. Darcy being married to one daughter as another. What fine carriages, what fine gowns, and what pin money her second eldest daughter would have, she consoled herself. She always knew Elizabeth was not so clever for nothing. By now, the reconstruction of the manor house was underway. That was not the only rebuilding needed. Heeding his sister's advice that Elizabeth would never truly be happy if estranged from her Hertfordshire relations, Darcy extended an olive branch to his future father-in-law, one that was readily accepted. Along with it came Darcy's promise to do everything in his power to see to the full restoration of Longbourn House. Upon Elizabeth's return to Hertfordshire, gone was Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's mean-spirited promise to consider their second eldest daughter a stranger. Indeed, she was welcomed back to Longbourn with open arms. The absence of heartfelt apologies on either side, however keenly felt, was something Elizabeth chose not to dwell on, preferring instead to think only of the past, as its remembrance gave her pleasure. Mr. Collins could not have been more pleased with the addition of Mr. Darcy to his family. Indeed, it infused him with a heightened sense of importance above and beyond that derived from being the heir of Longbourn. He prided himself in the knowledge that his noble patroness's nephew was also his brother. Emboldened by the promise of always having a home at Pemberley, Collins's kowtowing to Lady Catherine diminished considerably. Still, he would be ridiculous. If Mr. and Mrs. Collins should be so lucky as to beget a male child who would be next in line to inherit the Longbourn estate, that would really be something. Although Jane's true feelings continued to remain carefully concealed, the idea of a sturdy lock on the bedroom door at such time in the future was not without its appeal. Her outrage stymied by the prospect of losing her favourite nephew's esteem, perhaps forever, Lady Catherine ceded her resentment over the marriage, and she even condescended to wait on the Darcys at Pemberley. He was, after all, her favourite nephew. Nothing meant more to her ladyship than family. His hasty, ill-advised marriage did not diminish her love of family above all else, one bit, even if its future bloodline was subject to be thusly and thoroughly polluted. Charles Bingley's reaction to his friend's wedding was a mixture of joyfulness and regret. Indeed, he was happy that his friend was marrying the one woman who had captured his heart in a manner no other woman had managed. Still, the thought of what his own future life might have entailed gave him pause to wonder what might have happened had he not left Hertfordshire when he did. Miss Bingley, as well as Mrs. Hurst, were deeply aggrieved by Darcy's marriage. The former, despite having been provided an indication of the extent of Darcy's admiration for Miss Eliza Bennet while they were together at Christmas, was particularly outraged. But just as she had then, she thought it advisable to hide her resentment, a requirement if she wished to retain the right of visiting at Pemberley. As for the Gardiners, who had opened their home to their niece at a time when she needed it most, they did indeed travel to the north that summer. What a pleasure it was for Elizabeth to be settled at Pemberley as its new mistress in time to receive her dearest aunt and uncle. Whenever they all were together, there was always so much activity to entertain, not the least of which included fishing excursions to the estate's many lakes by the gentlemen and lovely phaeton rides around the park by the ladies. Georgiana finally had the sister she always wanted. Indeed, the attachment between Elizabeth and her was exactly what Darcy had hoped it would be. Georgiana secretly was prone to congratulate herself, not for being the means of uniting them, for she was absolutely certain her brother and her new sister were destined for each other from the start. But she liked to think that she had done her part in speeding them along the way. The elegant comfort of Pemberley was everything it ought to be. Mr. and Mrs. Darcy knew they had been truly blessed in finding their way to each other. What a joy it was knowing that for the rest of their days they would be spending their waking hours fulfilling the promise of ever-increasing love, admiration and respect, and spending their nights making each and every one of their favourite dreams come true. Thank you for listening to
Miss Elizabeth Bennet, Where the Heart Lives.
Written by P.O. Dixon. Read by Christopher. If you have enjoyed this story thus far, and I hope you have, your likes, subscribes, comments, and shares help this channel grow.
To further encourage these stories, consider joining this channel. Members receive exclusive perks, including minimal ads during early access periods. Existing members and subscribers alike, heartfelt gratitude for your support.